Oops. I haven't even updated my subject line. I'm ready. Yeah, hello. I am just, playing on 11. Might, maybe I'll watch, because I'm also eating food. I got something. What should I watch? What should I watch? What was I watching?
And encirclement, and by the time the Soviets invaded from the east, the fate of Poland was sealed. In less than a month, the Polish military had been crushed between the armies of Germany and the Soviet Union, and the government had been forced into exile. In April of the following year, the Germans set their sights on
I want to tell you about another
and encirclement, and by the time the Soviets invaded from the east, the fate of Poland was sealed. In less than a month, the Polish military had been crushed between the armies of Germany and the Soviet Union, and the government had been forced into exile. In April of the following year, the Germans set their sights on Denmark and Norway in order to deny the British access to the Baltic, secure their iron ore supply from neutral Sweden, and gain access to Norwegian heavy water facilities. The invasion of Denmark was met with almost no resistance, and was over in less than 6 hours, making it by far the fastest campaign Germany would ever complete. Norway did not fare much better. While the panzer divisions played a relatively minor part in the Polish campaign, the invasion of Norway would see these new armored tactics take on a very different role, specifically a non-existent one, as the campaign did not involve any armored units. Instead, the conquest of Norway was accomplished through an amphibious assault, utilizing naval, air, airborne, and ground forces in a coordinated, well-timed surprise attack. To minimize their disadvantages against the Royal Navy, the Germans planned the operation during April, when harsh weather on the North Sea would hinder enemy ships and reduce visibility, giving their invasion forces a better chance to safely reach their targets. As the Kriegsmarine held off the Royal Navy at sea, infantry units captured several key ports, while paratroopers were deployed to seize key airfields. This sudden and decisive attack caught the Norwegians and their allies off guard. Although it would be 2 months before the Norwegian army would capitulate, the nation's capital and most of its major cities fell to the Germans' amphibious invasion within the first 24 hours. The invasion of Norway was not the only important role that the Kriegsmarine played during the first 2 years of the war. Although Germany was blockaded immediately after the war started, the Germans also simultaneously began their convoy raiding campaign. U-30, for example, sank the British ocean liner SS Athena mere hours after the war declaration. The British soon adopted the convoy system and formed anti-submarine hunting groups based around aircraft carriers. This would soon backfire, as the HMS Ark Royal, Britain's modern aircraft carrier, was almost sunk 2 weeks after the war declaration, and another British carrier, the HMS Courageous, would actually be sunk 3 days later. German submarines would even infiltrate the British base at Scapa Flow and sink a battleship, the HMS Royal Oak. With the adoption of Wolfpack tactics, the U-boat fleet had immense success, sinking millions of tons of shipping. Even surface raiders like the Admiral Hipper and the Admiral Scheer had success attacking British convoys. This period of early success, the Admiral Scheer had nicknamed the Happy Time by German sailors.
What?
A month after the invasion of Norway, the Germans finally ended the 8-month phony war by launching their western offensive into the Benelux and France. The German plan relied heavily on fast-moving armored and motorized units to exploit weakness in the Allied defenses. On May 10th, the German army launched a surprise attack on the neutral countries of the Benelux. Overwhelming force, combined with daring airborne assaults, quickly managed to break the back of the Dutch army, while the Belgians, supported by both France and Britain, buckled in the face of Hitler's finest panzer formations. Rather than attacking the enemy head-on, fast-moving German units outmaneuvered their Allied counterparts to cut off their supply lines and disrupt reinforcements. It was these armored spearheads that drove through the Ardennes, avoiding the Maginot Line and encircling the British expeditionary forces around Dunkirk. The British were only spared from disaster by a daring evacuation. With the close support of the Luftwaffe, the invading forces were able to wreak havoc on Allied logistics, with devastating results. The Germans also took advantage of the fact that the French deployed their tanks evenly across the front line, which allowed them to mass their panzers into concentrated attacks. A great number of France's dreaded Char B-1 battle tanks, in many ways superior to contemporary German tanks, wound up being abandoned across the battlefield after running out of fuel, with their impressive armor barely scratched. German logistics, on the other hand, functioned very smoothly, with a report from Panzer Group Kleist asserting that there was not a single supply crisis that his group was unable to resolve. This was in large part thanks to France's infrastructure, which included a large quantity of gas stations. The steady supply of fuel allowed the panzer divisions to race ahead and attempt the far-ranging encirclement maneuvers that would ultimately play a major role in the rapid destruction of the French army. The stable supply lines the Germans enjoyed during the Western Offensive were absolutely critical for continuing their fast-paced armored maneuvers. Without them, the Germans' rapid advances could not be sustained. After Dunkirk, it only took the Germans 3 more weeks to conquer the rest of France. The fall of France also had the added benefit of providing the Germans with Atlantic naval bases, which would contribute to the success of their U-boat fleets. Meanwhile, the Germans would establish the Vichy French government in the south. The incredible success of the French campaign cemented a popular image of the Wehrmacht as an unstoppable machine, capable of rolling over its enemies with overwhelming speed and strength. Even the German leadership was largely taken in by the notion of their invincibility, despite the fact that it was blatantly false. Fascists in Italy looked on with envy and trepidation. Mussolini feared being sidelined by Hitler, and thus had thrust his forces into the Battle of France, leading to war with the British Empire. December of 1940 would see the Italians spectacularly fail on the field, losing 3 ships at Taranto and swaths of Italian Libya to the British by February 1941. Compounding these losses in the desert were Italian defeats in the Balkans, where Il Duce's half-baked invasion of Greece had turned into a rout of epic proportions, with the Greeks not only pushing the Italians out of their country, but following them into Italian-occupied Albania. The British soon allied with the ascendant Greeks, and the Italians found themselves brutalized by the Tommies on one side and the Hellenics on the other. Italy's attempts at conquest had turned into a dumpster fire, and Hitler feared the blaze would spread. His worry exploded into outright fury when Yugoslavia reluctantly joined the Axis powers, only to implode into an anti-fascist coup that the Führer took as a personal affront. Rolling up their sleeves and dragging the Italians and Hungarians along with them, the Germans swept into Yugoslavia in a blowout invasion, subjugating the rogue Axis ally in less than a month. Meanwhile, other German troops trudged into Greece, bailing out the beleaguered Italians and conquering the entire country. The British sent an expeditionary force to shore up the Greek defense, but even their combined strength couldn't stand up to the Nazi counterattack and its Italian hangers-on. The Allies withdrew to Crete, trying to make the island a Mediterranean stronghold, but the German Fallschirmjäger cracked the defense on May 20th, 1941, in a historic but Pyrrhic victory. The German triumph at Crete was a costly affair, to the point that General Kurt Student, who commanded the Fallschirmjägers, would dub Crete the graveyard of the German paratroopers. Germany had well and truly saved Italy's pancetta, but even as the dust of battle settled, there were some in Germany who questioned the wisdom of coming to Mussolini's rescue. Leni Riefenstahl, the Nazi propagandist, influential filmmaker, and close friend of Hitler, recalled the Führer stewing over the possibility that, if the Italians hadn't attacked Greece and needed our help, the war would have taken a different course. We could have anticipated the Russian cold by weeks and conquered Leningrad and Moscow. There could have been no Stalingrad. Hitler's assessment of Operation Barbarossa is disputed by modern historians. Richard Hooker Jr., a U.S. Army analyst, argues that the delayed timetable did not prevent the troops from advancing to Moscow between late June and mid-August, especially given their morale was at an all-time high following the victories in Yugoslavia and Greece. David Glantz, a military history professor, believes that Germany's Balkan campaign actually helped Barbarossa by discrediting Soviet intelligence reports of an imminent invasion. However, the popular belief is that Germany's support of Italy hindered Barbarossa, resulting in the first of many defeats for the Third Reich. The answer to this eternal question may never be found, lost in the fog of history. Operation Barbarossa initially lived up to its promise. The joint invasion by Nazi Germany and Italy, with support from Romania, Hungary, and Finland, saw the Axis make their typical quick gains and seize much territory, even as Hitler constantly changed their strategic goals. But the invasion hit a major stumbling block at the First Battle of Smolensk, which left the triumphant Army Group Center severely debilitated. High Command elected to order the center to hold and diverted other forces to reinforce the push into Ukraine and against Leningrad. Kiev would soon fall, and the Axis spent the ensuing months fighting their way to victory across the USSR, except for the grinding sieges at Leningrad and Sevastopol. Buoyed by their success, the Axis made a rush for Moscow, only to grind to a halt just outside the capital's suburbs. Burned out from their rapid advance, bloodied by dogged Soviet resistance, and with the Soviets gearing up for a counteroffensive, the Axis could do nothing but wait for the Communists' response, a response that would throw the Germans back from Moscow, even as they held onto their other conquests. But as the Germans licked their wounds, a new foe was brought into the war. The bombing of Pearl Harbor saw the United States declare war on the Empire of Japan, and honoring its treaty obligations, Nazi Germany declared war on the US soon thereafter. Germany was well and truly being pushed closer and closer to the edge. Due to the logistical issues, mostly lack of oil, the Germans could only focus on one army group for their 1942 offensive. Hitler and his generals began planning for the next phase of their offensive against the Soviet Union, aiming south with an eye toward seizing the Reds' oil fields. During a planning session, Hitler grimly informed the commanders of Army Group South that if I do not get the oil of Maikop and Grozny, then I must end this war. Their rush into the USSR had well and truly stretched the Germans thin, and the Nazi summer offensive, including the Battle of Stalingrad, represented a desperate Hail Mary. If the Nazis could capture the Soviet oil fields, they could retain the initiative and grind the hated communists into the dust. But desperation bred hunger for preparedness, and the soldiers who marched to capture the oil were neither ready for the mountainous terrain nor equipped for winter fighting. The Soviets proved dogged as ever, especially at Stalingrad, leading to the Germans being encircled by a Soviet counterattack that wiped out the 6th Army. Army Group South was ultimately forced back into Ukraine by the Soviets, with the Germans in the Caucasus barely managing an escape. During Operation Barbarossa, failure led to finger-pointing, with General Franz Halder, the chief of staff, blaming the diversion of troops to the Ukraine for the inability to capture Moscow. However, Halder's argument neglected the fact that Napoleon was able to occupy Moscow during his own invasion of Russia, and history may have repeated itself had the Wehrmacht reached the city. Even so, this was not a Napoleonic war of conquest, but a war of annihilation. The Soviets had to be exterminated, their land and resources claimed for Nazi Germany. Hitler, in many regards, picked the worst possible fight. He chose to throw his men against a cornered animal with unbelievable reserves of manpower and industrial capacity, and his men were mauled. It is February 1943. The cracks are beginning to show on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Stalingrad ending with both the Soviets and Nazis battered. But the Soviets can weather the beating. The retreat is draining Germany's oil. The Soviets are draining Germany's manpower, and the privations of war are draining Germany's hope. Joseph Goebbels, infamous minister of propaganda and the man who convinced a nation that millions of innocents just had to die, takes to the podium to sell the German people on the words emblazoned on the banners overhead: Totaler Krieg, total war.
Wir sind in diesem Kampf zu der Erkenntnis gekommen, dass das deutsche Volk hier seine heiligsten Güter, das 2000-jährige seiner Kultur und alles, was uns das Leben lebenswert macht, zu verteidigen hat. Der totale Krieg ist das Gebot der Stunde. Die Gefahr, vor der wir stehen, ist riesengroß. Riesengroß müssen deshalb auch die Anstrengungen sein, mit denen wir hier entgegentreten. Ich frage euch, wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Ich frage euch, ist euer Vertrauen zum Führer heute größer, gläubiger und unerschütterlicher denn je? Ist eure Bereitschaft, ihm auf allen seinen Wegen zu folgen und alles zu tun, was nötig ist, um den Krieg zum siegreichen Ende zu führen? Nun Volk, steh auf und Sturm bricht los!
Whether the people were willing to follow or not, Totaler Krieg wouldn't save the Third Reich. The failure of Operation Fallblau, or Case Blue, was a major contributor to the eventual Axis defeat on the Eastern Front, although many will argue that the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, was doomed from the start. Launched in June of 1942, Case Blue was an attempt to simultaneously cut off Soviet access to resupply from the Black Sea and capture the oil fields located in the Caucasus. The oil wells of Baku were of paramount importance, as Germany had exhausted its pre-war petroleum reserves. Yet, ironically, the operation designed to address this shortage only exacerbated it, as the marathon drive toward Caucasia and the scorched earth defense by Soviet forces stretched already fragile fuel lines, leaving their offensives in the east all but dead in the water. Case Blue culminated in the Battle of Stalingrad, which marked the deepest penetration of Nazi troops into the Soviet Union. But although they inflicted grievous losses on the Red Army, the offensive was ultimately turned back, along with practically all of the momentum on the Eastern Front. Germany went into the Caucasus for oil and triumph, but left with empty tanks and full graveyards. As bad as this situation was, Nazi officials had reason for some confidence. The Allied raid at Dieppe, France in August of 1942 was an embarrassing failure and a windfall for the German propaganda ministry, indicating that the Allies lacked the expertise to launch an amphibious invasion of Europe. The Luftwaffe also regularly inflicted heavy casualties on Allied bomber sorties, giving hope that they could still win the war in the air in the long term. This optimism was strengthened with the knowledge that cutting-edge jet fighters like the Me-262 might enter production within a year. But these dreams became increasingly far-fetched, as Germany's answer to its logistical challenges was the creation of ever more complex Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons, that created more of the same challenges: V-2 rocket systems to rain holy terror on petulant Londoners, STG-44s that would influence modern assault rifles, mouse tanks to grind the Judeo-Bolsheviks into dust, and other incredible inventions that were largely either too expensive, ineffective, or impractical. Fuel was a constant concern, with the Wehrmacht juggling supplies of petrol and synthetic gas to power its desperate operations. Far more sinisterly, the Germans relied on slave labor from concentration camp inmates, who suffered both from the malice of their oppressors as well as industrial accidents. All of these issues saw Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister and the man with his hands on the levers of German industry, playing an ever more challenging game of the floor is lava economic edition. Fritz Reinhardt, state secretary in the German finance ministry, reportedly said, the contributions that have been allocated to paying off the interest and principal on the national debt must henceforth be covered by current revenues earned from the economic exploitation of the Eastern territories. This economic exploitation, one of the many schemes designed to remedy Germany's excessive spending, paradoxically worsened the German condition, in large part because the scheme was falsely predicated on a quick and decisive military conquest. But Hitler and his advisors hardly concerned themselves with these practical considerations. They had Nazi ideology, which elevated the war to an apocalyptic struggle between the superior Aryan race and the Untermensch, who stood between them and the mastery of Europe. Early success in Poland and France had taught the Nazi Party that shortcomings in strategy or logistics could be overcome by raw Germanic prowess, encouraging blind belief in Nazi supremacy and downplaying objective analysis of defeats or strategic blunders. After all, as Hitler said regarding Operation Barbarossa, all the Germans had to do was kick the door in and the entire structure would come crashing down. That they kept having to find more doors to kick was another matter. Even after the failure of Case Blue, Hitler tried to keep the army on an offensive footing, but his plans were constantly postponed. Meanwhile, Soviet winter counteroffensives made inroads on Nazi-held territory, forming a salient around the city of Kursk. With summer approaching, Hitler authorized Operation Citadel, a massive attack on this salient by Army Group Center and Army Group South. What followed is often considered one of the largest tank battles in history, the Luftwaffe and Panzer divisions exhausting themselves trying to break through the Soviet defenses and envelop the salient. Yet this salient would ultimately hold, and Operation Citadel represented everything wrong with the German war effort. It was a reactionary move based on vague strategic goals that, even if successful, would merely delay the inevitable. After the failure at Kursk, the German disposition would permanently shift to the defensive. Even so, German morale endured the disaster at Kursk, and the Wehrmacht remained an effective fighting force throughout 1943. This was primarily due to the efforts of men like Walter Model and Albert Kesselring, who effectively transitioned the German army to a defensive posture. Hopes rested on a series of fortifications constructed along the Dnieper River, sometimes known as the Ostwall. Despite hurling up to 3 million Soviet soldiers at the Ostwall in August, the Red Army was unable to cross the Dnieper for nearly 3 months. Meanwhile, in the west, the Allied invasion of Italy was brought to a standstill at the Gustav Line in December. As winter set in, Hitler hoped that Germany could hold out until the unholy alliance between the capitalist Western Allies and the communist USSR collapsed under its own ideological weight. Unfortunately for Germany, reality finally came knocking on Hitler's door in June of 1944.
Zweifelt keinen Moment daran, dass die Amerikaner und Engländer landen werden. Aus ihren Schiffen wird sich eine Welle von Männern und Stahl auf unsere Strände ergießen und wir müssen darauf vorbereitet sein. Wir haben Minen, wir haben Panzersperren, wir haben den gesamten Strand aufgeklärt. Wenn wir doch nur die Panzerreserven hätten. Ob in Calais oder hier in der Normandie, es steht dasselbe auf dem Spiel. Das Schicksal Deutschlands hängt vom Ausgang der ersten 24 Stunden der Landung ab. Für die Alliierten als auch für Deutschland wird es der längste Tag werden.
The D-Day landings did not take the Germans completely by surprise. On the contrary, the highest echelons of German command were well aware that an invasion was imminent and of the least possible threat. The Führer was confident that the Atlantic Wall, stretching from the border of Spain to Norway, would not only repulse any Allied landing, but cause so many Commonwealth and American casualties that the Western Allies would lose their capacity to continue the war. Fritz Bayerlein, a senior aide to Erwin Rommel in Africa and later commander of the Panzer Lehr Division at Normandy, held the debacle at Dieppe up as incontrovertible proof the Allies could not manage an amphibious assault. The series of successful Allied amphibious landings in Italy gave even Hitler pause, however, and he placed Rommel in charge of shoring up the defenses along the English Channel. Rommel's task was an inevitable one. Concrete was at a premium, with the lion's share of Germany's supply going to the construction of hardened U-boat shelters per Hitler's direct orders. French laborers and Italian POWs were conscripted to improve the defenses. Turrets from captured French tanks were made into makeshift emplacements named Tobruk's after a jury-rigged reinforced firing pit Italian soldiers had built with buried cement pipes in North Africa, and extensive minefields were laid. Perhaps Rommel's most ingenious inventions were the Rommelspargel, or Rommel's asparagus, webs of metal wire strung along fields of short poles meant to shred gliders as they tried to land, alongside anti-ship mines placed into the beaches atop angled poles driven into the sand. But static defenses were only part of Rommel's strategy. Hitler and the High Command had become convinced the Allies would land at the easy-to-reach Pas-de-Calais. Operatives confirmed this loudly and often, falling for the Allied deception operation, Operation Fortitude. Rommel, for his part, began to shift his view toward an Allied landing at Normandy. The beaches were similar to the Italian shore, and the Allies would want to maximize their chances of success by striking on familiar ground. Regardless of where the Allies came, Rommel argued that the only way to beat them back was through defensive action on the beaches, meeting the Allies as they landed and denying them the opportunity to take even a centimeter of ground. Given the quality of the troops defending Normandy, this was far easier planned than executed. Normandy was the responsibility of the 7th Army, whose units in the area were, to put it mildly, of mixed quality. Promising recruits were siphoned off by SS, Fallschirmjäger, or Panzer recruiters, leaving a contingent of unfit or unremarkable men. Among the defenders of Normandy were the so-called ear and stomach battalions, composed of soldiers convalescing from combat wounds to their abdomens, or who were experiencing hearing loss, and
Unremarkable men.
foreign auxiliaries from conquered lands forced to fight for the Reich, including many Soviet POWs. Naturally, most proved highly ineffective, with many deserting to join the French resistance or surrendering to the Allies at the first opportunity. The few capable soldiers either suffered from endemic fatalism, such as Captain Eberhard Wegemann of the 21st Panzer Division, who commented, "We were well aware that neither our men nor our tanks were good enough, or were almost fanatically prepared to meet their foes." This attitude was usually evinced by the younger SS troops. As June 5th crept into June 6th, the Kriegsmarine pulled patrols from the English Channel. German meteorologists had declared the weather unsuitable for an invasion through June 10th. There was, scientifically speaking, no chance of a landing. Rommel took these assurances as an opportunity to go on leave, returning to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and arrange an audience with Hitler to request additional panzers along the wall. Friedrich Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army, ordered a command post drill for his officers on June 6th. The evening was shaping up to be a quiet affair, and the Germans began preparing for the next day's routine, until Allied bombs began falling. This itself was not unusual, as the Allies had launched near continuous runs against the Germans for some time, but this raid was an overture to Operation Overlord. As sentries fought off sleep, gliders began to make silent landings. As officers crawled to bed, paratroopers began to descend to Earth. Bewildered German commanders found enemies literally raining down on their heads and desperately rang to their superiors or assembled cells of ad hoc resistance. Lieutenant General Josef Reicher, commander of the 711th Infantry Division, recalled a night of drinking in the officers' mess ending in combat. The inebriated officer, pistol in hand, stumbled out into the night to find British paratroopers raining down on the 711th command post. Reicher and his men were able to fend off the assault, and the still drunk general desperately rang to his superiors to announce the beginning of the Allied invasion. In the American landing zones, Lieutenant General Wilhelm Fahle, commander of the 91st Luftlandedivision Division, was ambushed and killed by the 82nd Airborne just behind his headquarters near Saulmain-Iglay. Other Germans proved less willing to give battle. Rainer Hartmetz, a soldier serving near Normandy, rushed to his command post to find his officers gripped by battle shock. Two men were simply catatonic, while Reiner's company commander was sprawled drunkenly in a foxhole. Every time a runner brought news from the front line, the commander would idly threaten to execute anyone who returned to the scene of the action. As dawn began to light up the Normandy coast, the Germans were shocked to see an Allied armada steaming toward them. With no naval forces to challenge them, the Allied landing craft and their escorts took up their positions in the English Channel. And that's when the shells began landing. The opening bombardment of Omaha Beach caught German shore batteries in the middle of preparing for gunnery practice, turning what should have been a morning of plinking in the Atlantic into a scramble for survival. Weathering this bombardment was the 716th Static Infantry Division, a unit of notoriously low quality, composed of decrepit or boyish conscripts and poor motivated conscripts. The division was denied the usual allotment of artillery and heavy vehicles that the Army enjoyed, relying on a hodgepodge of German armaments and foreign heavy weapons. But the 716th was not alone at Omaha, as other areas were defended by the 7th Infantry Division. As battle was joined on the beach and American servicemen scrambled for cover, machine gunner Heinrich Zabelo of the 352nd could see the water spouts where my machine gun bursts were hitting, and when the little fountains got close to the GIs, they threw themselves down. They lay in the shallow water. Many tried to get to the most horrible obstacles to find some cover. I fired some more at the many black bones in the water. Zabelo Sr., one Lieutenant Bertram, pitied the Americans as poor swine, even as he called more artillery strikes onto the American infantry. All over the beach, Zabelo could see wounded moving around on the bloody, watery slide, mostly creeping, trying to get behind the shingle embankment. One by one, they would occasionally run in a crouch. As the day went on, men like Zabelo and their heavy weaponry would make Omaha the deadliest landing on D-Day. The 716th Division at Sword Beach was a sorry affair. The overstretched Germans were severely lacking in air support for completed fortifications and had utterly failed to coordinate with critical artillery in their sectors. The area teemed with vacation homes and coastal settlements, and save for some emplacements in the sand dunes and a handful of beach obstacles was largely undeveloped. The American soldiers were also of low quality, with Lieutenant Karl Haida bemoaning the condition of his division's officers. Many had been severely wounded previously, some unpleasant or socially inept due to their early harsh war experiences. I will not deny that some did get drunk at times. Lieutenant Schaff of the 716th noted that the rank and file were overworked and ill-motivated, too busy putting on fire and planting Rommel's asparagus to have much time for training. Indeed, the mix of Germans and Austrians defending Sword Beach routinely evinced a lack of care, as artilleryman Hans Blau describes his fellow gunners failing to keep their pieces clean. Sword would prove to be a relatively smooth landing, with the Germans yielding the beach to British forces with minimum casualties. Their attitude would change when they met the more professional soldiers of the 21st Panzer Division launching a two-pronged counterattack to the east and west of Sword. However, Major Hans von Buch, commander of the Eastern Thrust, wrote in his memoir Panzer Commander of attempting to lead the 2nd Battalion of the 21st against dug-in British paratroopers only to be stymied by Allied aircraft and naval fire. The German defense at Yoooo Beach was compromised by the airborne operations. Platform arms had crippled their ability to exchange information, while the spread-out landing zones made mounting a large-scale defense difficult. Utah and its neighborhoods were defended primarily by the 709th Infantry Division.
I didn't use my stupid fan.
Armed with a bizarre mix
I must have been paralyzed.
French, German, Polish, even Russian armaments filled their stores, but blessed with competent leadership at least. Lieutenant General Karl Wilhelm Graf von Schlieben, overall commander of the 709th, would order an actual organized counterattack in the face of the airborne assault, arranging for the 100th Panzer Battalion to drive forward to meet the 82nd Airborne at Saint-Mère-Iglay, and at their critical bridgehead over the Mère d'Ay. The 100th would be driven back by the 82nd in spectacular fashion as the obsolete French tanks they deployed against the Americans were annihilated with bazookas and gammon grenades. But the 82nd were not the only paratroopers in the area. The 6th Paratroop Regiment, under the command of Major von der Heide, pushed out of Carentan to reinforce their ground-based colleagues. As they came upon the Americans' landing zones, the Germans were astonished at the number of parachutes left behind. Yards and yards of silk littered the fields of France. The Fallschirmjäger would push onto the commune, Saint-Côme-du-Mont, where Heide climbed the church steeple and saw the endless armada in the channel. Things were not much better for the Germans on the beach proper. Lieutenant Arthur Janka commanded Fort W5, a network of bunkers and pillboxes built into the dunes over the beaches, which was all but destroyed by the morning bombings. Janka recalled how the raids obliterated his position. Avalanches of sand and concrete buried his men alive, forcing them to be dug out even as the assault on the beaches began. Spotting the American landing craft, Janka ordered what men he could rally to dig in, and ordered a dispatch rider to make for the nearest artillery battery to shell the beach. Janka's rider would be intercepted by American paratroopers. There was little Janka and his men could do as the landings began in earnest, with men and floating tanks fighting their way through the surf and straight toward the ruins of W5. A blast knocked Janka to the ground, and as his eyes fought to focus and the ringing in his ears subsided, he looked up through his skewed spectacles to see an American infantryman standing over him. As combat intensified on Normandy and reports of paratroopers and an Allied fleet flooded high command, the General Staff thought to themselves, this is all an elaborate ruse. The General Staff passed this thought around as Hitler slept in. As more and more Allied troops and heavy equipment began making their way onto the beaches, Hitler finally rolled out of bed to be met with word of the invasion of France. The Führer could not have been happier.
Are those
Hitler
things true
declared
sight?
again that the Atlantic Wall would throw the Allies back, and he eagerly anticipated following up the inevitable failure of the Normandy landings by raining V-1 bombs on London. The Western armies would be ground into the sands of France, and the seat of his hated British enemies would be blown to smithereens by superior German weaponry. But as the day dragged on, and the Allies began to gain ground, the frontline commanders flooded High Command with requests for support, requests to do something to prevent their positions from being overrun. The beacons of Normandy were lit, but High Command would not answer the call for aid. Hitler, the only man on Earth who could release the Panzers, would continue to insist that the Allies could and should be thrown back on the shore. This thinking had managed to seep into some of the defenders on Gold Beach. Friedrich Wurster helped crew a battery of 4 captured Czech cannons at Marie Fontaine near the beach. Wurster firmly agreed with his Führer that the Atlantic Wall was impenetrable, an attitude he kept right up until the British overran his commander's spotting position near the shore. In the face of Allied superiority in men and materiel, Wurster and his fellows quietly surrendered. Further behind the lines, the Germans were hard at work trying to corral the French civilian population. Propaganda vans drove through Caen, ordering the population to remain indoors while the German authorities began to arrange for the evacuation of key parts of the city. At von Rundstedt's headquarters outside of Paris, telephones rang continuously, and teletypes
It doesn't have
sent
true sight,
seemingly
do
infinite
it?
messages.
Do it? Do it?
Combat at Gold Beach began in earnest when the first landing craft dropped their ramps. The moment the metal hit the surf, German machine guns and artillery opened up on the British troops, who fought hard to clear the beach and sweep the fortified coastal houses the Germans had worked into their defenses. Indeed, the Germans put up a fierce fight at Gold, with elements of the 352nd Infantry raining fire on the British from a cliff top over the beach at Amel, including devastating volleys from a Flak 88.
There's so
The
much
British were
shit
only
to
able to unseat the
run.
Germans at Amel with tank support, including a mortar-armed member of Hobart's Funnies. Elements of the 12th SS Division spotted the invasion fleet anchored off of Juno Beach in the early morning hours. Lieutenant Peter Huntsman of the 12th recalled being awoken by his NCO in charge shaking my shoulders. Herr Leutnant, the invasion has started. Hansman rushed to a vantage point near Gold Beach. Looking through my binoculars, I recognized the individual outlines of ships. At irregular intervals, flashes of ships' artillery were coming from various spots. Fast boats with high, white, foamy bow waves were spitting out brown clumps of men on the beach. The lieutenant counted over 400 ships in the channel from his front row seat to the end of the Third Reich. I wanted to shout at all the generals right up to Adolf Hitler, over here, quickly, before it's too late. Whoever can still fight, come here. The fastest, most powerful divisions, send them here. The Luftwaffe, where is it? The Kriegsmarine, where is it? It
My
must be
Luftwaffe,
here.
where is it?
Grenadier Hans Weiner,
dirty.
who defended a position on Juno dubbed
must be
WN-31,
slow.
recalled watching the first
Sweet.
Tommies jumping into the sea, which was quite shallow. The bullets hit them and their boats to good effect, and I was a little surprised to see them falling. I don't know why. Weiner's position was eventually torn apart by the tanks coming ashore with the Canadians, which managed to drive inland under the barrel of 88mm cannons poised to shred them as they emerged from the surf. 88mm gunner Heinrich Zebel complained of not being able to see many tanks due to the smoke and chaos, though his gun claimed
This
at least
is
2
right.
Allied tanks before their Blockhouse 2 was
Thank
blown
God.
apart. The Germans provided a much tougher obstacle for their foes at the Taiville Chateau, roughly 1 mile or 1.5 kilometers inland.
Chateau these
Taiville was
nuts.
supposed to be the starting point for a second line of defensive works laid out by Rommel before the Allied landings came. It was a well-built strongpoint, with a full communication and command complex and underground tunnels connecting it to Tobruk turrets armed with machine guns, cannons, and mortars. The defenders managed to hold the Allies back until nearly 6 p.m. that day, with their final message before the position was taken reading, hand-to-hand fighting inside the command post, hemmed into a closely confined area, but still holding out. Heil Hitler. Not long after the fall of Taiville, the Canadians began making their way toward the Luftwaffe airfield at Copycat, one of their key objectives. The commandant of the airfield ordered an evacuation, inciting panic in his ground crews. The Germans made a hurried attempt to destroy the aircraft before they evacuated, but their haste proved fatal. Attempts to raise the airfield left most of the taxi
I don't
area
think
of the
those are
runway
true
untouched. The takeoff runway was damaged, but not sufficiently to render it unusable, and the vast majority of the field's fuel stores were
That
salvageable.
might be true, so.
In this one case, haste ended up lessening waste. While Operation Bagration in the east shattered the Germans' precious battle lines at the
Nipper?
cost of around 400,000 men. With Germany's forces being ground to a pulp by the Soviets, Romania and Bulgaria defected in 1944, and the panicked Germans occupied Hungary to prevent their defection, even as the Hungarian Prime Minister begged the Soviets for a separate peace. Though German ferocity delayed the Allied advance, they could not match their superiority in men, materiel, and air power. Hemorrhaging manpower, and with hardly any supplies or economic strength remaining, the Germans had to get creative to replace their mounting losses. In addition to raising 78 Volksgrenadier divisions and moving extant regiments around to create new armies on paper, the Germans made a desperate attempt to augment their forces in the form of the Volkssturm, or People's Storm. On October 18, 1944, Hitler personally ordered that all civilian males aged 16 to 60 join a new force that would continue to protect the Reich. The Volkssturm was not an organ of the Wehrmacht, which Hitler was beginning to see as weak and incompetent, but rather a paramilitary militia controlled by the Nazi Party. Allied intelligence at the time estimated that at full strength, the Volkssturm could have mustered over 13 million fighters to oppose the march to Berlin. Less than half that number could put up an honest fight. The Volkssturm were initially issued whatever uniforms could be scrounged up, but as the logistical situation deteriorated, their only standard piece of equipment became a black and red armband, identifying them as members of the militia, which led to members fighting in everything from civilian business suits to hand-me-down Imperial German kits from the First World War.
Hand-me-down
The
underwear.
Volkssturm were armed with a hodgepodge of civilian hunting rifles, weapons captured from Allied and Scandinavian countries, and surprisingly ingenious last-ditch weapons. An example of this last category was the Eintos Flammenwerfer, a portable single-shot flamethrower.
Who the
The
hell are they?
Eintos was essentially an oversized aerosol bottle
Oh, is
designed
there a
to fire a
fucking,
single half-second gout of
oh,
flame
they're
before
DC.
being discarded, in the same vein as the single-shot.
Is there a
Panzerfaust.
survival
Such
guide
weapon
out
would
there?
have been as simple as point and roast, making it perfect for civilian users.
Bye.
German resistance
There's
would
a
not
planner,
end
right?
at the front line, however. Joseph Goebbels launched a massive
There might be
propaganda
a
push centered
guy
around a
down
partisan
here. I
network,
don't
Wehrwolf, which would, in theory,
I could look on
continue
the
the war
fucking
even in the event of a German defeat.
internet.
People the foolish allies would take for friendly civilians would in fact be hardened fighters, with
I don't think I'm on the
national
right
socialism burning in
map
their
for
hearts
it.
and ready to transform at any moment into a fighting force to sow discord and strife among the allies. Nazi partisans would, in reality, carry out or take credit for numerous assassinations and sabotage operations during the final years of the war. But the massive organization Goebbels wrote about was never a serious threat. With Wunderwaffe in hand, the Germans would win the war. Maybe. The Führer realized that only a grand offensive would
Mein
now
Führer,
conclude the war for
how
Germany
will
favorably.
we
The question
win the
was where
war?
stood the
We
best
need
chance
all
of
that
success,
in
as action against the Soviets or in Italy would bear little fruit. There was, however, one sector which had historically served the German army well. Hitler, no doubt fueled by a sense of 1940 nostalgia, ordered a massive armored attack through the lightly defended Ardennes
just
region.
like in
His
the
goal was
good
to
old
drive onto
days.
Antwerp and isolate the Commonwealth forces in Holland, knocking them out of the war and forcing Britain into another Dunkirk to save
Yeah,
what soldiers
penis.
would be left. Perhaps even triggering negotiations for peace and
Oh,
freeing
it
up German
looks
troops
like a
to
big
finally
show.
defeat the inferior Soviets
Bah.
in the east. Hitler was proven partly right in his predictions when the offensive, codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein, took the American defenders by
suck
complete
my
surprise, causing panic in their lines. However, in a characteristic display of hubris, Hitler and his high command had not only severely underestimated the fighting prowess of the American army, which after the initial shock continued to provide
They can't do
tenacious
shit in the
resistance
snow
on
either.
key crossroads and towns all over the Ardennes, but they had also failed to provide their army with enough fuel. Exhausted and
What are
undersupplied, the
these?
battered remnants were ultimately ordered to
Weird
withdraw
ninja
entirely
guys.
when a strong Allied counterattack forced its way through their weakened lines.
Dude, their IT's
Hitler's
up there
final
fucking
gamble had
building.
utterly failed, and with it, Germany's last
I'm
military
near whatever
reserve,
zone I
so
need to
desperately
be.
needed to repel the
Hopefully I
forthcoming
can
winter
get there.
offensive on the Eastern Front had been set.
And there's nothing blocking my fucking way.
Germany's remaining defenders now had their work cut out for
Holy
them.
shit, my just
In
did the
January
wear off.
1945, the Soviets built on the momentum of Operation Bagration to launch the Vistula-Oder offensive, a crushing drive into Poland that saw Germany lose their first conquest of the war. With renowned
Oh,
Field Marshal
Germany
Yoooo
having
at
their
the head,
order.
the Soviets obliterated 45 divisions and claimed to have killed or captured 400,000 men, stopping at the Oder River bordering the fatherland. The propaganda minister recorded a feeling of utter terror sweeping through the capital of
What
Berlin,
are
as the
happening?
citizens of Berlin worried that the Soviets
Please,
had a clear path to the
Let there
city.
be a zone.
There is nothing between us, no
Thank you.
anti-tank gun, no anti-tank obstacles, not a single soldier.
Please, don't let there be a true sight mob.
The eyes of the world were now converging on Berlin as Stalin's armies prepared for
Objection.
their final act of vengeance that would eradicate Nazi Germany once and for all. Although the Allies had
What is
promised
it
to
here?
leave Berlin to the Red Army, the
fuck
ever-paranoid
is
Stalin
that?
still urged haste in the capture of the city. The final plan called for a three-pronged attack on the Berlin axis to encircle and capture the city within 12 to 15 days, then move on to meet the Allies at the Elba River. Zhukov's first Belarusian front would be at the center of the thrust, while Marshal Ivan Konov's first Ukrainian front to the south was set to attack across the Nysa River in the direction of Potsdam and Dresden. Finally, Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky's second
Dude, this
Belarusian front would tie
fucking
down German
curse is
forces
still
to
on
the
there,
north
shit.
in the Stettin-Schwedt sector to prevent them from reinforcing Berlin. Having become accustomed to fighting on wide-open terrain,
Don't mind.
few in the Red Army had much experience in large-scale urban street fighting. It was up to General Vasily
Automation knows
Choikov's
how
8th
to
Guards Army,
debug it.
veterans of the Battle of Stalingrad, to
Do it,
distribute
don't it?
pamphlets on urban
It's
warfare,
you, is
while
all,
special
it's
combined
you,
arms
it's
task
Bob,
forces were
baby.
formed. Red Army engineers, on their part, worked day and night to construct hundreds of
Work
bridges
on
and
these
thousands
nuts.
of wooden assault boats to cross the Oder and Nysa rivers. To achieve this, Soviet planners had to find a way to move 29 armies over hundreds of kilometers to create shock groups capable of penetrating the German line in areas
Okay,
only
I'm in the
2.5 to
Kadera
10
Meyer.
kilometers or 1.5 to 6 miles in width.
I have to go to
When it was all said and
K5.
done, the Red Army would advance on Berlin
Somehow?
with some
Yeah.
2.5 million men,
I don't have a map for this area?
6,250
What a
tanks and
shitload of-
self-propelled
oh, wait, I
guns,
do.
and 7,500 combat aircraft. Aiming to make the invaders bleed for every inch of German soil, the Wehrmacht constructed a series of well-entrenched defensive lines which
Okay.
barricaded the way into Berlin. Manning these positions were the remains of Army Group Vistula and 4th Panzer Army, as well as the Berlin garrison. Combined,
Let me
this
get my
force
buddies
consisted
out
of
so I don't get
750,000 German
fucking
soldiers,
destroyed.
supported by 1,519 tanks and assault guns, 9,303 guns and mortars, and 2,200 aircraft. However, these numbers looked more impressive on paper than they did in reality, as virtually all of its formations were under strength. Although many units were led by battle-hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, their rank and file was often made up of a mix of wounded, unfit, and inexperienced soldiers, and even boys from the Hitler Youth. Moreover, some 60,000 of the defenders came from undertrained and barely armed Volkssturm militia battalions. The infantry would not be able to count much on its armored and air assets either, as the Germans lacked the fuel reserves to keep its otherwise considerable force of fighting vehicles operational for any
The
extended
Hitler
period
Youth
of
did
time.
not save
Morale
us.
was also at an all-time low. Most
Or
suffered from
them.
malnutrition and a lack of hygiene, and save for the most fanatical Nazis, few now believed in the promise of final
Hello.
victory.
How are you?
Even so, every effort was made to convince the
You
men
are
that the
IT.
much
You would
anticipated
kill me.
Wunderwaffen would still turn the tide of the war, and that peace talks with the Western Allies were soon to bear fruit. But if these motivations were only marginally effective, the widespread fear of Soviet vengeance and barbarism drove even the most cynical to continue fighting. On April 12th, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra gave its last performance. Among the music played was Richard Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. 4 days later, another type of orchestra began to play as thousands of Katyusha
What the-
rocket launchers and field guns of Zhukov's front
Moss
opened up on the
Boy?
1st German defensive line along the Zelo
That's
Heights.
IT.
Miles away in Berlin's eastern suburbs, houses began to shake as terrified citizens gathered in the street to listen to the start of the coming
Oh,
storm.
so
A
that's the
stunned Russian
music.
engineer described the unfolding spectacle. Along the whole length of the horizon, it was bright as daylight. On the German side, everything was covered with smoke and thick foundations of earth and clumps flying up. There were huge flocks of scared birds flying around in the sky, a constant humming,
I
thunder,
didn't
explosions.
just-
We had to cover our ears to prevent our eardrums breaking. As the sound of artillery gradually faded, hundreds of men began shouting, "To Berlin!" as tanks
Oh
and
my
the elite assault elements began advancing
fucking
toward the
god!
heights. Many of the German defenders, unfortunate enough to have been caught in the preceding onslaught, had disappeared in the blink of an eye, while dazed and panic-stricken survivors rushed back toward the second defensive line.
Oh
However,
my
the awesome
god,
bombardment obscured
dude, I'm
serious
so
problems in Zhukov's plan.
dumb.
The destruction caused by the shelling had been so great in scope that it had severely worsened the condition of the terrain that his men now had to traverse. The searchlights, intended to blind the enemy, instead reflected onto the smoke-filled air and obscured the vision of the advancing infantry. In the resulting chaos, units lost contact with each other as Soviet artillery and aircraft began attacking friendly
Oh
formations.
my god, this
Worse
game
still,
is
German intelligence
shit
had prior
sometimes.
knowledge of the coming offensive, which meant that many of the first-line troops had been evacuated to the safety of the rear. What ensued was nothing less than what a member of the Großdeutschland Guard Regiment described as a slaughterhouse. Countless soldiers were cut down as they struggled to advance across the floodplains and through German minefields. In other sectors too, the attackers were cut down and repulsed as they attempted to cross the Oder. Sensing disaster, an increasingly agitated Zhukov ordered his 2 tank armies to attack at once. However, most of the infantry's artillery and supply vehicles were still trying to make their way to the front, causing the tank armies to become hopelessly stuck in an endless traffic jam. Even when the lead armor finally approached the heights, they found themselves ambushed by concealed 88 gun emplacements, Tiger 1 tanks, and infantry armed with deadly Panzerfaust recoilless anti-tank launchers. Unsurprisingly, Zhukov's decimated men had made little progress at the end of the first day, and it would take 3 more days and countless more dead before his armies finally forced their way through the final defensive line. Naturally, Stalin was infuriated, but he could rest easy in the fact that Konev's front, to the south, had seen more success. By the end of April the 18th, his tank armies were across the Spree River and were racing toward Berlin. Lacking sufficient reinforcements and ammunition, the surviving defenders in both sectors were forced into a headlong retreat. With the German defensive lines in the south and in the center broken, and with vital troops in the north still tied down in heavy fighting, the road to Berlin lay open. Lacking the supplies to keep on fighting, German morale now visibly began to collapse. Thousands of encircled men surrendered, while masses of stragglers, deserters, and refugees made their way into the doomed city. All the while, an increasingly delusional Hitler continued to demand fanatical resistance until the bitter end.
So fucking dumb.
On
I gotta
April 20th,
fucking do it
the
all
Führer's
over
birthday
again.
was rudely interrupted by Soviet artillery shelling Berlin's northeastern
All that
suburbs.
fucking
As
shit
its
I
citizens
just
fled
did.
into cellars, Zhukov and Konev's tank armies began a frantic
Oh
race
my
to the city's
god.
outskirts.
All because I fell off
In
that
the
little
meantime,
fucking
many
cliff.
senior officials of the Nazi party
I wasn't
engaged in
paying
a similar
fucking
type of
any
competition
attention
to be
on
the
how
first one to get
fucking far
permission
I
to flee the
was.
city. Soldiers on the ground enjoyed
God,
their
I hate this
privileges,
shit, dude.
and those who tried to run or displayed signs of cowardice
You
were
can't just
summarily
have
hanged
any
throughout the city
fucking
with messages
goddamn
such as, "I was a coward,"
jump
or "I was a
button.
deserter," dangling from their chests. The next
Or be
morning,
able to
Soviet
just go
artillery
up to
fired a
other
frenzied
fucking
barrage
heights.
into Berlin's city center, while the remains of
Stupid
General Helmut
fucking
Weidling's 56th
goddamn.
Panzer Corps of the German 9th Army conducted a desperate withdrawal across Berlin's Autobahn ring, while being mercilessly strafed by Soviet aircraft. Other remnants of the German defense attempted in vain to stop Zhukov's armies from pushing into the city from the southwestern and northwest. However, its depleted units could only delay the enemy, and Zhukov and Konev's forces both reached the city's outskirts that evening. Believing himself to be the next Frederick the Great, Hitler remained confident that a massive counterstroke by the newly created Army
So
Detachment
fucked up.
Steiner and 9th Army against Zhukov's flanks would trap the invaders in the city in a ploy similar to what had befallen the Germans at Stalingrad 2 years prior. When it became clear on the following day that Steiner's army detachment lacked sufficient strength and ammunition to attack, the Führer finally cracked and openly admitted for the first time that all was hopelessly lost. With the Soviets breaking into the city, General Weidling was appointed commander of the Berlin defense area. However, by the time Weidling took command, only about 45,000 Wehrmacht and SS troops, just over 40,000 men of the Volkssturm, and a measly 60 fuel-starved tanks were left standing to defend the city against some 1.5 million Soviet troops. Unsurprisingly, Zhukov's armies had managed to push the defenders out of the eastern and southeastern suburbs by the end of the 23rd, while other fronts tightened their grasp around the city's flanks. With inevitable defeat looming on the horizon, many of the defenders began to lay down their arms. Others, however, continued to resist fanatically. At the Tempelhof airport, a mixed group of SS-led German defenders, including some 100 Hitler Youth, wreaked havoc on the attacking Soviet tanks and infantry, who had to resort to massive aerial and artillery bombardment to finally capture the airport a day later. By that time, the encirclement of Berlin had been completed. However, a manic Hitler promised Weidling that yet another massive counteroffensive by General Wenck's 12th Army in the southwest was sure to come to the rescue of the beleaguered defenders. Wenck, however, had no intention on embarking in a futile suicide mission, and instead moved to relieve encircled German troops further to the east. With no further hope of relief, Weidling urged the Führer to stage a breakout westward to join up with remnants of Army Group Vistula. Hitler, however, rejected the plan and restated his intention to fall at the head of his troops. During the next 3 days, the Red Army tightened its hold on Berlin as the advancing armies closed in on the inner defensive line, protecting the governmental district. The lack of clear demarcation lines between the fronts, however, led to various formations competing for space and getting hopelessly confused in the ensuing quagmire. After careful deliberation, it was decided that most of Konev's frustrated men were to be redeployed to Czechoslovakia, while Zhukov was to go in for the final kill. By the end of the 29th, the 8th Guards Army had blasted its way through the heavily defended Tiergarten sector, while the 3rd Shock Army had crossed the Spree over the Moltke Bridge just to the north. In front of them lay the ultimate prize, the blackened walls of the Reichstag, the former parliamentary building widely regarded as the symbolic heart of the Third Reich. Capturing it would be nothing less than the culmination of the entire Soviet war effort. The defense of the building and its surroundings was led by a determined group of mostly foreign SS fighters with little less to lose. In the morning of the following day, Soviet artillery opened fire as a few hundred assault troops rushed forward. After a heavy firefight, the men reached the main entrance and proceeded to clear the building in brutal close-quarters combat. After hours of bitter fighting, the red banner was spotted hanging from the second floor at around 2:30 p.m., but it wouldn't be until late in the evening before a path to the roof had finally been cleared. Two sergeants, identified as Mikhail Yegorov and Meliton Kantaria, managed to reach the top and hoisted the hammer and sickle on top of the Reichstag, marking the symbolic end of Hitler's Third Reich. As this historic moment unfolded, an even more momentous event occurred barely a kilometer away. With Soviet troops converging on his bunker complex, the embittered Führer knew that he had reached the end of the line. The German people had failed him and his vision of a 1,000-year Reich. After giving Weidling the go-ahead to attempt a belated breakout, the Führer said his farewells to his remaining staff, poisoned his dog Blondie, and retired to his study room to commit suicide together with his newly wedded bride Eva Braun. But Hitler's death did not put an immediate end to the fighting. The new chancellor, Joseph Goebbels, rejected Stalin's demand for an unconditional surrender of the garrison, prompting the Red Army to blast the remaining German positions until the defense was reduced to little more than a few isolated pockets. With Goebbels' subsequent suicide being announced that night, the door to peace in Berlin could finally be opened. At 6 a.m. on May 2nd, General Weidling officially ordered his remaining men to lay down their arms. When the guns finally fell silent in the afternoon, an eerie silence descended on the city of which Troikov would later write, "The flame of World War was quenched whence it arose." Although fighting in Europe would continue until Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8th, the war had come to a climax at the Battle of Berlin. The capture of Germany's capital had cost the Red Army an estimated 78,000 men killed in action and over 274,000 wounded. In return, the Germans had lost some 90 to 100,000 men killed in action, as well as at least another 200,000 wounded. During their advance into Germany, the vengeful Red Army had left a trail of pillage and destruction in its wake. An estimated 95,000 to 130,000 women in Berlin alone are said to have been sexually assaulted, of which 10,000 would later commit suicide. Still, many Germans were relieved that the conflict was finally over, and that a semblance of normal human life was slowly returning under shared Allied Soviet occupation. However, the alliance between the two victors would prove short-lived, and the start of the Cold War would usher a new type of crisis in the city, which had suffered so much during the Second World War. The German soldier's shovel pierces the soft loam. For the last year, he has worked on a farm in the southern United States, transferred to a labor detail after several months in a detention center. He and his fellows have spent their time laboring in the fields, watching American films, and thinking about what they'll do once the war is over. The Americans work their charges hard, but they are fed well and are treated better than the black sharecroppers who labor alongside them. Perhaps our soldier thinks he will have a new trade to practice when he returns home. The German soldier's shovel strains against the frozen earth. For the last year, he has worked in a graveyard in the Soviet Union, transferred to a labor detail after several months in a detention center. He and his fellows have spent their time shunting frozen corpses, languishing in Spartan barracks, and fighting desperately to survive. The Soviets work their charges hard, but the privations of war mean the communists can barely feed themselves, much less prisoners of war. Perhaps our soldier thinks he will soon join his former comrades who stare blankly at him from the pit. When VE Day was declared in 1945, the Allied powers held roughly 11 million German soldiers as prisoners of war. The vast majority of these, 6 to 8 million, had been captured by the Western Allies, while the remaining 3 million were in the custody of the Soviet Union. With Europe liberated from Nazi aggression, the Allied powers were left with a critical question. The issue was a divisive one, to say the least, as while the Western Allies were signatories to the Geneva Convention, which very clearly demanded the release of prisoners the moment the war ended, the Soviets had notably abstained from signing the international agreement. This meant that the actual German soldiers' fate was ostensibly decided by whose hands they fell into, but war is a brutal business, and sacrificing international law is just ink on a piece of paper. During the war years, German soldiers were imprisoned in roughly 20 countries around the world, including in the continental United States. While stateside, many German prisoners were leased out to farms or factories to serve as laborers, providing additional hands to make up for the workers lost to the draft. A hotbed of this leasing activity was the southern U.S., where German POWs befriended American citizens and watched Hollywood films during their off hours. Overall, POWs sent to the U.S. were treated humanely, and deaths of Germans in American custody were low at 491. Things were different in the internment camps in Europe, where American estimates for POWs who died in custody lie in the low thousands, while German tallies claim up to 40,000 fatalities in American custody. The Americans' early release of many prisoners complicates attaining an exact number. For their part, the British Empire managed the fate of up to 2.5 million German POWs by the war's end. Germans kept in Great Britain could be housed in anything from tents set up in a pastoral field to elegant manor houses repurposed as surprisingly posh prisons. Similar to their comrades in the US, German POWs in Britain enjoyed a cordial relationship with British civilians who gave them money and foods that they were not usually fed. Germans in
Does
Britain
that
could
thing
also
have
be put
two
onto
sides?
a labor
No,
camp, for which they were paid a
I
respectable
bioed.
2 shillings per day of work. The number of German POWs who died in British custody reported to have engaged in torture when interrogating Germans suspected of committing war crimes, often leading to confessions extracted under duress. But this was far from the worst a German captured on the Western Front could expect. That dubious dishonor lies with France. German soldiers captured in the liberation of France, as well as a number relocated there from American custody, faced Germans and vengeful civilians. French citizens would verbally harass or assault German prisoners, stoning or beating them, sometimes to death. Some POW camps seemed designed for extermination rather than detention. A French camp in the South gave Canadians only 900 calories worth of rations per day. For comparison, a Jew living in the early days of the Warsaw Ghetto was, on paper at least, allotted just over 1,000 calories of rations by the Nazis. And shortly after VE Day, the Red Cross reported that almost 200,000 German soldiers in French custody faced imminent starvation. The United States was forced to halt any further shipments of POWs to France and mandate their adherence to the Geneva Convention, an act that, in practice, was largely symbolic. The end of the war meant, according to international law, repatriation. But for the Western Allies, the end of the war largely seemed to mean reparation. The US and Britain leased roughly 1 million German POWs to the French to rebuild their country, while 64,000 went to Belgium, 10,000 to the Netherlands, and 5,000 to Luxembourg. Germans on the continent would assist in reconstruction, building roads or working in sawmills and quarries. Some in France and the Netherlands were made to clear minefields. 2,000 POWs were killed or maimed each month doing this. Conscripting the workers this way was a clear violation of the Geneva Convention, but the Western Allies claimed that since the German government technically did not exist, their charges were not prisoners of war, and therefore were not entitled to the protections afforded to POWs.
Okay. Mental gymnastics much.
The Soviets had suffered greatly in their war against fascism, and they did not want a pound of flesh for their trouble. They wanted tons. Soviet plans for post-war reconstruction included the use of German POWs as forced labor as early as 1944. Ivan Maisky, Soviet ambassador to the British Empire, called for the Germans to be given as reparations to the Soviet Union for a lengthy period, which he ultimately defined as 10 years. Maisky would refine his proposal for the Yalta Conference and provided Stalin with a full-scale plan to get the USSR a supply of 5 million German POWs to be used as forced labor for a decade after victory was achieved. With this mass conscription and the planned seizure of German land and wealth, the Soviets hoped they could keep the German people from ever fighting against the USSR. With the war's
And the only real
end and
problem
carving
are
of
the
Germany
fucking
into
imps.
occupation zones, the Soviet plans were put into effect. Soviet authorities began identifying their new charges, with ethnic Germans in Soviet territory
That is dumb
investigated to
that that
determine if they had served in the
fucking-
war. Any who had verifiable Wehrmacht service were
Had
ordered to
no-
Soviet POW camps to be prepared for forced labor. The Soviets would organize their new workers into battalions of 3,000 to
like
5,000 men,
area
divided
to
into
run.
1,000-man companies. They were primarily used for construction and heavy
Small
industry,
space.
with a laser focus on rebuilding the utterly devastated Soviet Union. 3 million Germans would be drafted into the Soviet labor companies. A full third would die
Shit.
there.
Don't
It should be noted, however,
see
that this
me.
may not have been the result of direct Soviet action.
Four
or negligence.
fucking imps.
Theirs was
One's
a
in-
war
one of them's in that
annihilation,
scene,
where
I
both
just know
German
it.
and Soviet gave no quarter
Yep.
and expected none. Consequently, a number of the men forced into these labor companies were POWs captured
Bitch
by the
cast
Soviets
stun on me.
directly, and due to the horrible conditions of the Eastern Front, came into
I don't
Soviet
wanna get near
custody
that fucking
malnourished,
big
sick, utterly
kraken
exhausted,
thing.
or some combination of the three.
Flying
It would
ass
not have been
octopus.
pragmatic for the Soviets to intentionally slaughter their newly acquired labor pool so shortly after a war that devastated their working population. From 1945 to 1946, many POWs who were too sick to work were simply released by the Soviets rather than be worked to death. Harvest and endemic management seemed to be behind the travails of the forced laborers for years. However, as time went on, German laborers began to prove more trouble than the Soviet masters thought them worth. POW labor was a surprisingly expensive enterprise and had to constantly be subsidized
Come on,
by the
run
main
away.
Soviet economy.
Anyway.
The Germans contributed roughly 5% of the Soviet Union's total national income, a far cry from the grand reparation
GG's.
envisioned by Maisky and his
59.
10 years of servitude. In a surprisingly capitalist move, Soviet industrial leaders began to see their German workers as unprofitable and began to skimp on their responsibilities to feed and care for them. After all, why waste good money and materiel on what they saw as fascist parasites? As their industrial managers began to sour on the concept, Soviet leaders began making moves toward repatriation. In 1947, the foreign ministers of the Allied powers agreed that they would repatriate all German POWs by 1948. The Soviet effort would last well into 1950. Roughly 26,000 German POWs would be convicted of war crimes by Soviet courts, not sent back to Germany as late as 1956. Overall, Germans in the Soviet Union after the war were faced with mandatory hard labor under challenging conditions, but the majority were repatriated long before the South Germany soldiers who had been discharged before the war's end, or who had deserted their Führer's crusade against the rest of the world, or who simply had been far enough away from the front lines that they were not captured. Those Germans who escaped capture and who were in the Western occupation zones found themselves cast adrift in a new Germany. The Allies were keen to strip Germany of any martial will, and to this end, of militarism of any military-inclined organization or club. This meant that German veterans of the Second World War, unlike their former foes, had no support system to help them transition back into civilian life. These suddenly demobilized soldiers found themselves in a country gripped by denazification, as the Western Allies sought to purge the influence of Hitler and Goebbels' propaganda machine and eliminate all traces of Nazi ideology and warmongering. To this end, former soldiers were ordered to present themselves to Allied tribunals for summary judgment. Originally run by the occupying forces before being handed off to German authorities in 1946, these tribunals would take stock of the defendant's military and civilian activities during the war.
I still got this
The court
bio
would
on me. I
categorize
can't
the defendant
run
as a major
past
offender,
this shit
offender, lesser offender,
without
follower,
getting
or
into
given
a
a full
fight.
exoneration. By and large, rank-and-file members of the Wehrmacht were categorized as lesser offenders and sentenced to a 3-year period of probation. During this time, they were prohibited from holding public office or running their own businesses. As more and more defendants were found or presented themselves, the tribunal system began to buckle under an ever-growing
And I'm
caseload,
losing
and
HP.
judges began finding or making a multitude of exceptions to speed the process up. Disabled veterans were often exempted from judgment, along with those who could prove that they were impoverished during the war years, or were born after 1919. While this system succeeded in streamlining the process of former Wehrmacht personnel, it allowed those with real Nazi sympathies to slip through the cracks. Denazification was abandoned in the 1950s, as its inefficiencies became more apparent, and the German public began pushing back on the idea of individual culpability. Why reckon with your part in crimes against humanity when you can simply pin
Why,
a dead
dude?
Austrian painter and move on with your life? And more Christians and of irony, many former Wehrmacht personnel, judged by the Allies for their service, would soon find themselves right back. With the growing threat of the Soviets to the east, the Allied powers realized that a militarized Wehrmacht would be a key step to the war descent into another global conflict. The Bundeswehr was established in November of 1940. Sometimes wielding the same weapons they used to fight the Allies.
My HP was probably low.
The highest echelons of military and civilian file guards were arraigned on charges of crimes against humanity and prosecuted at a series of trials, most famously at Nuremberg. Prosecutors from all Allied nations presented a
I gotta use
preponderance
up my
of evidence,
sparks.
ranging from private diaries to ledgers of concentration camps to military dispatches. The prosecution's point was clear. The military was equally responsible for Hitler's horrors as the SS and civilian leadership. There was no distinction to be drawn between the independent and politically minded SS and the duly enlisted soldiers of the Wehrmacht. While separate, these two cogs in Hitler's machine of annihilation would often work in sinister concert. The Wehrmacht would take an area, and the SS would purge it of undesirables. Military officers, such as Keitel, and high ministers, like Ribbentrop, were hanged, while others were sentenced to prison terms, ranging from life to time served. Others, such as Hermann Göring, took their own lives rather than face the hangman. There were even a few female defendants, such as the sadistic hyena of Auschwitz, Irma Gläser. Gläser was ultimately hanged for her brutal treatment of concentration camp inmates, unusual for a time when executing women was a stark rarity. But these people were still allowed a defense, and theirs was simple. We were just following orders. The thrust of these arguments was that any Nazi soldier, officer, official, or minister accused of crimes against humanity was simply following a directive from a higher authority. Some, in fact, falsified orders to show that they had no choice in the matter, creating false paper trails to justify their own malice and cruelty toward Jews, Roma, LGBTQ people, and others the Nazi Party declared undesirable. Many of these false stories were pushed by the defendants' families who were tired of the war, tired of the reckoning, and just wanted their sons, daughters, husbands, or wives home, whether they were a monster or not. This attitude began to pervade German public consciousness with unfortunate results. In 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany was founded, a new German state for a new German people. The first chancellor of this new Germany, Konrad Adenauer, opened his tenure by announcing plans for a general amnesty for war criminals who had been sentenced by the occupying powers. The desire for Germany to be an ally against possible Soviet aggression trumped the desire for justice, and spring of 1950 saw the Advisory Board on Clemency for War Criminals established to review cases for leniency. 105 cases were brought to the Advisory Board in August of 1950 as family and friends of convicted war criminals, as well as representatives of the new German government, presented all manner of mitigating evidence, from medical history to the newly birthed Clean Wehrmacht myth, which stated emphatically that all Nazi crimes were the fault of the SS and Hitler's inner circle. Proponents of the Clean Wehrmacht myth argue to this day that the common soldier of Nazi Germany was an honorable, chivalrous man, fighting for home and hearth, untainted by the atrocities of his peers and the hateful rhetoric of his leaders. 84 of the 105 cases heard by the Advisory Board were
Damn it, we're gonna
or outright
fucking
and the fairy tale myth of the Clean
aggro
Wehrmacht
that crab.
spread through the years. Generations of Germans breathed in a sharp divide between their ancestors and his crimes.
I
eager
forgot
to
about that
compartmentalize
thing.
the shame of their nation's atrocities and their own histories. War like history, is never simple nor simple. The soldiers of Germany captured the battlefield
God damn
to be
it,
treated in accordance with the and in many cases they were, until the war's end. The pragmatic and vindictive moves by the Allies to force German POWs into rebuilding Europe do not excuse the crimes of Nazi Germany, just as Nazi atrocities do not excuse Allied violations of the Geneva Convention. It is imperative that we remember history is not entirely black and white, but rather painted shades of gray, with definite areas of clear morality and humanity. To simplify history into West versus East, good versus evil, or any dichotomy, is to ignore the true lessons our history has to teach us, and these profound lessons are often to be learned in the darkest chapters.
Oh, it ended. Shit. Oh, it's that thingy. I'm surprised we didn't aggro that. So this person animated Godzilla in Gmod, I think, or Unreal? I forget which one. It looks really good. It looks scary as hell. They should make a video game like this. It looks really good. All these fucking whatever the fucks. Octopuses. And I'm going the wrong way. Are you serious? Oh, I thought we got aggro. I didn't even realize there's somebody like fighting a bunch of mobs. Shit. People level out here? This is really good. I wish they would remake the whole movie like this. Not that the film is bad, the film's phenomenal. But it'd be cool to see 3D remade like this.
Does your old TTS method not work anymore, since Solrock no longer exists and UberDuck decided to put a paywall over their services? Well, do I have the solution for you? I was in a similar boat where my TTS broke, and I didn't know how to replace it. I did some looking around, and I found just a solution. It turns out the solution is a little program.
I want to have a chat buddy. I've been meaning to do it for a while now, but it might be fun. Okay, this time, don't go past this little fucking area. Let me get my dress out in case I get my ass killed by these goddamn rams. Give me some trust so I know I can trust myself not to die. And don't run past K5. Don't run past this little tiny fucking... Where's this fucking thing at, though? It's supposed to be, like, right here. I'm in the exact coordinate. Is that it? It's right the fuck there, and I passed it. This tree's right here. It's gonna fucking aggro me. Don't run too far. Don't run too far. Don't run too far. Get your stupid item. Thank God. Be strong, for the goddess is with you always. There you are. Finally, let's go home together. I'd sooner run with the Chigos. Migos? Seriously? Okay. Give me my item. This is way too long than it should have been. Okay, I need to wait. And after this, I gotta take a quick little AFK. Clean up my cat's mess. But I'll be RB. Elizabeth. Yo! Wait. Don't you dare. Let me throw away something first, please, before you kill me. Do I have to watch the cutscene again? Bitch. These Biscoff ice cream bars are really good. Okay, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. This old chestnut. Elphaba. I mean, Elizabeth. I mean... Ariana Grande. How do you get a tattoo like that on your head? In this day and age. Okay, there we go. Alright, let me equip this and head back to town and I'll be right back. My puppetry... Churadara? 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 Their legs. They're my pants. 11 HP, plus 3 charisma, and enhances cure potency. Spell interruption rate down. Nice. Let's get the fuck out of this place. I am sick of this quest. I'm sick of this area. I love Matsu EP. And I will be right back.
over your school, you'll be in charge, and then the slime will fly. To enter, just send a postcard to Nick Takes Over Your School, P.O. Box 4024, Orlando, Florida 32857. Include your name, address, age, telephone number, and name of school. If Nick takes over your school, we'll send Mark Summers, Mr. Wizard, Clarissa, and Hulk Hogan to run the school by your rules. Plus, if you win, every kid in your school wins a Flick Flack alarm clock, and you host a live concert, score a complete Levi's wardrobe, and get $1,000. Win, and it could be so beautiful. Brought to you by Levi's, Honeycomb, LA Gear, and Nickelodeon.
Buster, you're late for school! It's gym day! Buster!
Why walk to school when you can fly?
Now buy 2 pairs of specially marked Buster Brown or Wildcat shoes and get new inline skates for just $15.
Where? Only at Buster Brown.
Mr. Wizard's World will be back in less time than it takes to boil water.
One kid's meal right away. Can you make that too? Could you please pass the chicken? Certainly.
Now at Burger King, lickety splits.
Can I have the French toast? By pleasure.
You can collect all 4, a new one each week when you buy a kids meal.
Room for a little dessert?
The Burger King Kids Club, just for fun, just for you.
You're watching Nickelodeon, and now back to Mr. Wizard's World.
When slime geyser eruptum, time for news you can use from Nick. Why go to school on Monday? To increase your aptitude in math, science, reading, writing, and thermodynamic chemistry, of course. Just make yourself smarter all day, then come home and get moronic. Moronic, that is, with 5 hours of Looney Tunes this Monday. Just go to school and then get more on Nick Monday after school right here.
I love my special cupcakes. Now they have places to go. Let's take cupcakes to the beauty parlor. To a tea party. It's the Cupcake Sundae Vanity. The ice cream sundae hides a vanity inside. A hairdryer, brush, even ribbons. Ready for the tea party cake? Open the tea cake wide. Come to the party inside. Piece of cake, cupcake.
Cupcake Sundae Vanity and Tea Party Cake playsets, each sold separately. Cupcake dolls not included.
It's kid time.
Listen up! Words coming down.
America is watching ABC.
Keep on living.
Ooh, and we'll keep on giving.
You're a part of us, America. America's watching ABC.
More cool TV.
On ABC. And America is watching ABC.
This fall.
To the thousands of special effects already found on Sega Genesis, we add one more. The Sonic Boom. Sonic the Hedgehog, now included when you buy a Genesis system.
Loop to loop without hurting my knees. And now it's time for chocolate. I really wanna have a Hershey's please. Now I'm talking chocolate.
New Dino Pebble cereal with marshmallows. Dino's a real rat, dude. New Dino Pebble cereal. They got his attitude. Marshmallow to Dino's purple, orange, red, green, vanilla flavored cereal.
What a team!
Marshmallow Dino-licious. Dino, stop licking my face. New Dino Pebbles. Marshmallow Dino-licious. Part of this nutritious.
Breakfast place.
The Dino.
When the slime geyser erupts, it's time for news you can use from Nick. Monday morning. Yeah. Date 9/9/1991. It's a day to fill your brain at school and get moronic after school. More on Nick, that is, with more Looney Tunes than you can shake a stick at. Whatever that means. actually, it means 5 hours of Bugs, Daffy, Porky, Yosemite Sam, and the rest of them after school today.
Ooh, wow, look at this big magical changes. New small little miss. Wee little miss. Mine wants to be a ballerina. Now watch her change. Eyeshadow, lipstick too. Ribbons on each ballet shoe. Magical. Beautiful. Ooh, wow. My wee little miss is a sleepyhead. She's awake now. Wow. Ooh, wow, wee little miss. Wee little miss dolls change with warm and icy water. You can collect them all, each sold separately, new from Mattel. I want to be on NBC.
I want to be on NBC. And you'll be with Bo Jackson, Wayne Gretzky, and Michael Jordan, the Pro Stars.
Low nose cartoon.
I want to be on NBC. Be with movie superstar Macaulay Culkin as Wish Kid. Yogi Bear in his all-new Yo Yogi cartoons. And the coolest cats in a litter box from beyond.
Space Cat.
Saturday mornings this fall. If you want to be with the best cartoons, just say, I want to be on NBC.
NBC.
High above the jungle, swinging from trees, I am Coco with my Coco Krispies. If I'm not careful, I end up in a bind. Some big ape's trying to take what's mine, but I'm too clever, I'm much too quick. I can make anyone fall for my tricks, oh yeah. Kellogg's Cocoa Krispies are such a chocolatey and delicious part of this complete breakfast. Even the milk turns chocolate with every bite, so chocolatey. Oh, everybody wants my Cocoa Krispies.
Watch me trick Fred out of his Cocoa Pebbles.
What happened, Coco? What's wrong?
I can't keep fighting crime unless I get something super chocolatey.
You need my delicious Cocoa Pebbles.
Truly super chocolatey.
Bonnie, my pebbles.
Guess it's time to bolt.
Post Cocoa Pebble cereal, part of this nutritious breakfast.
This is the story of two houses. 4 years ago, the Taylor house was painted. In the same year, the Baker house had beautiful vinyl siding from Sears installed. Today, the Taylor house is peeling and cracking again. But the Baker house, with vinyl siding from Sears, looks as good as the day it was installed.
If you want to enhance the beauty of your entire home, or if you have a brick home with just hard-to-paint eaves and overhangs, do it right with maintenance-free vinyl siding from Sears.
And do it now, because you can save $500 and make no payments until March 1992 if you act now.
So if you want your home to look fresh and new year after year and enjoy big savings, don't pick up a paintbrush, pick up a phone and call for your free estimate now.
Call 1-800-492-8300 now for your free in-home estimate on Sears installed siding. Save $500 and make no payments until March of 1992. Call 1-800-492-8300.
We made a film for Nickelodeon. And we taught our hands to act. Lights, camera, action. I'm Bob. I'm Tiffany and I love dressing in makeup, but I hate dogs that. I'm Evan and I love Nickelodeon.
When the slime geyser erupts, it's time for news you can use from Nick. No school yet in New York City. Not till tomorrow. Public school, anyway. And anyway, whatever school you're at, it can be taken over. Taken over by Clarissa, Mark Summers, Mr. Wizard, and leading the pack, Hulk Hogan. If you win, the Nick takes over your school sweepstakes. Look for details on how to enter right here on Nick.
The following message was filmed 2 days before the death of Danny Thomas. It is being aired with his family's permission.
There are some words a child should never learn.
I have rhabdomyosarcoma.
When they did the biopsy, they said that we're 99% sure it was osteosarcoma.
I have acute lymphocytic leukemia.
These are the words of children with cancer. They're in a race against time, and even at their age, they know it. There's reason for hope at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, one of the world's foremost centers for research and treatment of childhood diseases.
Hi, I'm Danny Thomas. The valuable work at St. Jude is saving so many lives, and with your help, we can save even more. By contributing just $16 a month, you can become a St. Jude Partner in Hope and help a child through their treatments, or help a parent travel to St. Jude to be with their child. You know, St. Jude has made a remarkable promise to these children and their families. Absolutely no one will be turned away for their inability to pay. So we urgently need your help to keep that promise. So help us with your tax-deductible contribution of just $16 a month. That's only 53 cents a day. As a monthly donor, you'll receive regular updates on the children you'll be helping. Or if you prefer to make a one-time contribution, please give as much as you can. But call this number now. Your contribution is needed immediately.
Everybody needs to keep a positive attitude, because that's basically what brings you through this.
Please help some little one recover before she too has to learn the frightening language of cancer.
Please call this number now. You can even charge your gift and help keep cancer from claiming any more young lives.
It seems Wendell has eaten Cinnamon Toast Crunch supplies everywhere.
Except here, the Cinnamon Toast Crunch warehouse!
Irresistible!
Hurry!
I gotta have that blast of cinnamon and sugar.
You just can't resist Cinnamon Toast Crunch, can you?
The crunchy part of this complete breakfast.
See, Wendell? There's enough for everybody.
Even me.
Now, on Nickelodeon News Flash, kids are attempting to build time machines so they can race through the week and go straight to Sunday, where they'll find Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy, Nickelodeon's new cartoons. Is it worth altering the fabric of reality to see Nickelodeon's new cartoons now? You bet your Bunsen burner it is. Until kid scientists perfect the pursuit of time travel, you'll have to wait for Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy. Nicktoons calculated to arrive every Sunday starting at 10, 9 Central, only on Nickelodeon.
Here's how to play Nickelodeon Slime Time game. Watch Nickelodeon's O-Zone all this week. The kids we call will call the shots live on national TV. You've got 3 chances to make a match and win a color TV, VCR, Sega Genesis 16-bit video game system, and Sonic the Hedgehog cartridge. Only on Nickelodeon Slime Time game. All this week in the O-Zone. Brought to you by Sega Genesis and the place where only kids win.
Nickelodeon!
What's Terry's big secret?
Whoa!
Once Lester finds out, the whole world will know. Don't miss the season premiere of True Colors. Then, the new teacher is a schoolboy's dream.
Could I see you in my classroom first thing in the morning?
And this Sunday...
You wanted to see me, Miss Mason? Parker, yes. Come in.
Look who's staying after school. What happens next? Find out on Parker Lewis Can't Lose. Right after True Colors, all new episodes Sunday.
When the slime geyser erupts, it's time for news you can use from Nick. The Pete's are back. Back to save the summer in their all-new half-hour special, What We Did on Our Summer Vacation. The Pete's, Ellen, Hardy, the strongest man in the world, and Michael Stipe of REM and Kate Pearson of the B-52s, too. What We Did on Our Summer Vacation. Tonight at 8, 7 Central. I'm Nick at Night.
Hit it!
This fall! Listen up! Words coming down.
America is watching.
Make way for an exciting superhero!
I am Darkwing.
Alright, I'm back. Excuse me.
Have you ever felt like your online life is an open book, like the internet's spying on you and just waits as much to jump out and say, surprise, spying on you? Well, guess what? There's a solution for that. Enter Surfshark, your virtual superhero against online intruders. Setting up is easy. Voila, your online life is now your business and nobody else's. Worried about VPNs being expensive? Well, fear not. Surfshark keeps you private without breaking the bank. Also, if you're going somewhere, don't let borders dictate your content choices. Surfshark lets you access your favorite shows from back home, wherever you are. It's like a mask for your online identity, ensuring that you have total privacy. Travel the world, connect to popular websites, unblock streaming platforms, change your virtual location, all of that good stuff. Plus, the Surfshark Alert, antivirus, and search monitor your data, keep your devices virus-free, and browse without a trace. With over 3,200 servers worldwide, GPS spoofing on Android, bypasser, top-grade encryption, kill switch multi-hop, and a strict no-activity logs policy, Surfshark is your VIP pass to the internet. One subscription, unlimited devices, 24 hours support, they've got your back. And a 30-day money-back guarantee in case you don't like it, which you won't use because you'll love it. So what are you waiting for? Head to surfshark.deals/ITS and enter the promo code ITS to unlock a Surfshark Get up to 6 thanks to Surfshark.
Yeah.
Joseph Stalin was one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century. After taking power, his immediate efforts to turn the Soviet Union into a global superpower backfired, causing his leadership to be called into question. Unwilling to face the possibility of defeat, Stalin decided there was only one option: find and kill everybody who opposed him. So join us today as we examine the Great Purge, Stalin's cold-hearted execution of over 1 million of his own citizens, just to ensure that nobody who survived would dare question his authority ever again. Now, it all began in 1924 with the death of Vladimir Lenin. Lenin had been the head of the Communist Party and was the founder of the Soviet Union as a single party. But his somewhat sudden death left now a vacuum. Lenin had suffered multiple strokes in the years leading up to his death, resulting in partial paralysis, but he had appeared to be recovering. When he fell into a coma on January the 21st, 1924, and died later that same day, the stage was set for somebody else to claim power. Several high-ranking officials jockeyed for that power, with the two frontrunners being Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. Stalin was the general secretary of the Communist Party, and Trotsky was the commissar for military and naval affairs, essentially making them the top political official and top military official respectively. For 4 years, but Stalin emerged victorious as the leader of the Soviet Union. He exiled Trotsky to Turkey and began undertaking the first of his 3 5-year plans. Now, the first 5-year plan had 2 major objectives: rapid industrialization and the collectivization of agriculture. Privately owned livestock and farmlands became government property overnight, and the peasants were forced to become collective farmers instead. This abrupt change led to a decrease in agricultural production. Many people forced to work on the collective farms had little to no experience, with a large number of experienced farmers either fleeing to urban areas, fleeing the Soviet Union entirely, or trying to oppose the authoritarian takeover. This opposition was often met with lethal force from the government. In addition to overall lower output, the government seized the vast majority of the grain being produced, choosing to export it rather than feed its own people. The Soviet Union needed money in order to fund its entirely unrealistic pace of industrialization, and Stalin believed that this was the most efficient way to get that money. Unfortunately, this resulted in years of famine across the Soviet Union, with the worst year being 1932 to 33. It's estimated that the famine resulted in the deaths of 5.7 to 8.7 million people, with as many as 7.5 million of those deaths occurring in a single year. While Stalin had been widely accepted as the new leader of the Soviet Union, his disastrous 5-year plan made people call his leadership into question. By 1934, Stalin's rivals were already trying to make moves against his authority. Even from exile, Trotsky was calling for the removal of Stalin from office, and he wasn't alone. That summer, Adolf Hitler carried out Operation Hummingbird, also known as the Night of the Long Knives. It was 3 days of extrajudicial executions of Hitler's political opponents, and it is claimed that Stalin was inspired by this. But it wasn't all in yet. In an attempt to win back public support, Stalin would take contradictory actions. He began releasing prisoners who had been convicted of minor offences and launched a commission to investigate false imprisonments. But at the same time, he was ordering executions of suspected spies without trial. This wouldn't last long, however. While Stalin did his best to feign a desire to limit government oppression, that ended in December of 1934 with the assassination of Sergei Kirov, a high-ranking Soviet official and strong advocate of Stalin. Following Kirov's assassination, Stalin began becoming extremely concerned with the threat of assassination. He's often described as having become paranoid at this point, but one thing was clear: there was no more room for mixed messages. Public actions to show a reduction in state repression would come to an end, and instead Stalin made it clear that his enemies would be found and dealt with. Throughout 1935, this mostly just meant expelling suspected enemies from urban areas. People would be expelled from major cities like Leningrad by the thousands, forced onto the collective farms where they couldn't cause as much trouble. This was already a purge in a manner of speaking, and it had been going on for years. The Soviet Union's Communist Party had been purging its ranks of members, with over 400,000 people being expelled from the party for fear that they were Trotskyites. But in 1936, the purge was going to take on a new face. Executions against ordinary civilians accused of being spies or attempting to undermine the Soviet Union were hardly rare, but for the first time, Stalin was going to turn the party against its own upper ranks. And this purge of party leadership was going to be as public as it was bloody. Now, the first of the Moscow trials is generally considered the official beginning of the Great Purge. It was a trial of 16 supposed Trotskyite counter-revolutionaries, with the chief defendants in the trial being Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev. The two were prominent figures in the Communist Party and had been among Lenin's closest associates. While it was true that both men opposed Stalin politically, especially in light of the death toll resulting from the famine, they were trying to enact change through political means. However, at their trial, what they confessed to was far different than the reality of their actions. Zinoviev and Kamenev confessed to being involved in the assassination of Kirov, as well as confessing that they planned to assassinate Stalin. Many historians believe that Stalin had actually ordered the assassination of Kirov himself, and there was no real evidence to link either of these men to the crime, nor to any plots against Stalin's life. But since they confessed, it didn't matter. Of course, those confessions at trial were the result of intense physical and psychological torture, but the public didn't know any of that. All 16 defendants confessed to the charges, and they were all executed. This show trial had been organized by Genrikh Yagoda, chief of the People's Commissar for Internal Affairs, or the NKVD. The NKVD was the Soviet Union's secret police at the time, the predecessor to the KGB. But a month after the trial, Yagoda was replaced as chief of the NKVD by Nikolai Yezhov. Yezhov was zealously loyal to Stalin, and his first order of business was to arrest Yagoda on Stalin's orders. Stalin was becoming suspicious of Yagoda and wanted him out of the way. To that end, Yezhov had the NKVD contaminate his office with mercury. The contamination was then used as an excuse that Yagoda was attempting to assassinate Yezhov. He would remain in custody until his trial in 1938, proclaiming his innocence and loyalty to Stalin the entire time. In 1937, Stalin directed the NKVD and regional party members to estimate the number of criminals and kulaks in each district. Kulaks was a term that before the Soviet Union specifically referred to peasants that owned 8 acres of land or more. Once the Soviet Union was formed and land was collectivized, kulak became more of a vague term that referred to wealthy peasants and property ownership in general. Though their property had been seized by the government, the formerly wealthy peasants were seen as a threat to the communist society, and as such, they needed to be purged. Yezhov issued NKVD Order 00447, which was designed to deal with the kulaks and other anti-Soviet elements, such as Trotskyeites, members of any political party beside the Communist Party, suspected political enemies of Stalin, intellectuals, and really, well, anybody that they just felt like they wanted to purge. These people would be rounded up by the NKVD and either summarily executed or sent to gulags. The initial estimates from each district were based on the number of people already under surveillance, but once that number had already been purged from the district, requests would be sent to Stalin to increase the number by thousands at a time. These requests were authorized, and the purge continued. It was in 1937 that the second show trial took place as well. The 17 accused were politicians, like in the first trial, though they were less prominent figures than those from the first one. Western observers were allowed to attend this trial, and they all believed that the men had been tried fairly. After all 16 of the men in attendance confessed to their guilt. Of the 17 originally accused, former head of the NKVD, Alexander Beloborodov, was the only one not to confess. As a result, he was not present at the trial. What the Western spectators didn't realize was that these confessions had all been obtained through sadistic torture methods. The trials had been rehearsed repeatedly beforehand, and the interrogators and torturers were all seated in the front row to remind the accused what would happen if they deviated from the carefully rehearsed script. 13 of the 17 men were executed following the trial, with the others, including Beloborodov, sent to the gulags. All 4 of them were murdered while there. The second show trial paved the way for Yezhov to expand the purge, in particular thanks to the testimony relating to Nikolai Bukharin and the Right Opposition. The Right Opposition, a faction of the Communist Party that objected to parts of Stalin's 5-year plan, were believed to have largely dissolved by 1933, but it appeared that they still remained in at least some capacity, or at least their alleged existence provided justification to continue the purge. However, the purge began to extend beyond just supposed political opposition. Ethnic minorities also became a target, with the largest operation targeting the Polish population. Over 110,000 people were executed as part of the Polish operation, with only about 85,000 of them actually known to be ethnic Poles. The others were merely suspected of being Polish, which was enough for them to be summarily executed with no follow-up questions. Despite ethnic minorities only making up 1.6% of the population of the Soviet Union, they accounted for 36% of the total deaths during the Great Purge, with Poles alone making up 12% of the total deaths. In addition, there were also people who were purged merely by circumstance rather than any action on their part. If a person was executed for opposing Stalin, then their entire family could fall victim to the purge as well. So too could their friends, neighbors, and passing acquaintances. With Stalin trying to industrialize the Soviet Union at a rate that simply wasn't feasible, there were also a fair number of industrial accidents. Anybody who worked at or near the site of one of these accidents could be executed on the basis of alleged sabotage, even if there was absolutely no evidence of foul play. The loss of civilian lives was immense. But one of the most shocking developments was the military purge. This would also be one of the most important aspects of the Great Purge as it related to future events. While over 30,000 members of the Soviet military were executed as part of the purge, it was not exclusive to the rank and file. A staggering percentage of high-ranking officers were subjected to the purge, including 3 of 5 marshals, equivalent to 4-star generals, 13 of 15 army commanders, equivalent to 3-star generals, 8 of 9 admirals, 50 of 57 corps commanders, 154 out of 186 divisional commanders, 202 out of 406 brigade commanders, and 11 vice commanders of defense, 98 of 108 members of the Supreme Military Soviets, all 16 army commissars, 25 of 28 corps commissars, and 58 of 64 divisional commissars. Not all of the purged officers were executed, and about 30% of those that were convicted were eventually allowed to re-enter military service. However, the mass imprisonment and execution of high-ranking military officials played a key role in Hitler's decision-making during World War II. Hitler's generals felt that an invasion of the Soviet Union would be a fool's errand. But Hitler disagreed. He believed that their military would be severely weakened by the loss of so much knowledge and experience at the highest ranks. This decision to invade led to his defeat at the Battle of Stalingrad, which is widely considered to be the turning point of the war. So, in March of 1938, the third and final of Stalin's show trials would take place in Moscow, also known as the Trial of the 21, on account of the 21 defendants. This was the highest profile of the three trials because it involved the highest profile defendants. Among them, Bukharin and Yagoda, as well as multiple diplomats and people's commissars, which would be roughly the equivalent of cabinet members in the United States. Once again, brutal torture was used to ensure that all of the accused would confess to their crimes, or perhaps all but one. There is some evidence that Bukharin voluntarily confessed in exchange for certain liberties. He was given the opportunity to write 4 manuscripts while awaiting trial. These would not see publication until the 1990s, when they were found in Stalin's personal archives. It's probable that Stalin never intended to honor any deal that was proffered to Bukharin, though even if he had, that all would have gone out the window when Bukharin took the stand. While he did confess to his crimes, he did so in the most sarcastic manner possible. This was only known to those in attendance, as Stalin personally altered the transcript of the trial before it went to publication. It wasn't until 1996 that the original transcript, complete with Stalin's pencil-marked modifications, was released. Bukharin stated in court, "I accept responsibility even for those crimes about which I did not know or about which I do not have the slightest idea." But, sarcastic or not, a confession is still a confession, and since the trials had just been for show, the verdicts were already predetermined. All 21 defendants were found guilty, with 18 being sentenced to death. The remaining 3 were sentenced to 15, 20, and 25 years in prison. After 3 years, the Great Purge finally started coming to a close following the third Moscow trial. Yezhov was fired as head of the NKVD, and on November the 17th, 1938, the government issued a decree suspending executions and putting an end to the NKVD's numerous orders of repression. But the damage had already been done. The exact number is impossible to know, but it's estimated that the Great Purge claimed the lives of between 700,000 and 1.2 million citizens. Some were political enemies of Stalin, but others were executed because of their ethnicity, because they happened to be in vague proximity of an industrial accident, or because they were chosen entirely at random. Becoming the target of the purge spelled doom for a person's entire family as well. If a man was convicted, even when the NKVD knew that it was on the basis of false charges, their family was subject to punishment as well. Wives and children as young as 12 could be executed or sent to the gulags, with younger children being sent to orphanages. However, once the Great Purge came to a close, it was time to tie up loose ends. Stalin had tried to execute all of his political enemies, but he had done so through corrupt, extrajudicial means. This meant that everybody involved had to be dealt with as well. After being stripped of his position, Yezhov was put on trial and executed. The judges from the show trials were also executed, as were the 3 men who were only sentenced to prison rather than death in the final Moscow trial. There was only one man that seemed immune to Stalin's persecution, and that man was Vasily Blokhin, the head executioner for the NKVD. Blokhin was responsible for carrying out tens of thousands of executions by his own hand, including the execution of many of the people that we've talked about today. Politicians, the military, and even the secret police were all expendable. But the man who would murder anyone at Stalin's command, well, he was untouchable.
Let me fucking figure out what I'm doing. Artifact on this. Outfit. Right here. Okay. So what's the reward for, the hat? So I need to go to, that's
Captain Lloyd W. Williams can hear the sounds of combat. Men of the 5th Marine Regiment pick their way through Belleau Wood, newly arrived to reinforce their flagging French and British allies. Suddenly, forms come bursting from the thick woods. The Marines raise their rifles, but instead of Stahlhelmed Germans, they find their lines swamped by battered French infantry. As their comrades retreat through the American line, a French colonel approaches Captain Williams, but his English is broken and unintelligible. The French officer gives a snort of frustration and pulls a notepad from his kit, scribbling a note. Captain Williams reads the proffered order before fixing his bayonet, uttering 6 words that will echo through the history of the United States Marine Corps. Retreat? Hell, we just got here. General George S. Patton once referred to the M1 Garand as the greatest battle implement ever devised. Its reliability and accuracy on the battlefield is legendary, and thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Goat Guns, you can own your own high-quality die-cast miniature-scale model of this iconic firearm. Ranging from 4 to 15 inches in length, Goat Guns models are designed to be as accurate as possible to their functional counterparts, up to and including authentic wooden finishes and leather shoulder straps. This makes designs like the Garand as well as other models stand out all the more, while little details like the detachable magazines and moving parts and dummy rounds add a sense of realism that no plastic model could hope to match. Goat Guns are fun to assemble, make for great display pieces, and are the perfect holiday gift for gamers, history buffs, veterans, or active duty service members. Ordering is easy with free shipping for orders of $75 or more. Support our channel today by clicking the link in the description below and start building your Goat Guns collection today.
I think guns are really cool. I just hate
Safe behind its twin moats of the Atlantic and Pacific, the United States watched the development of the First World War with concern. When hostilities broke out in July of 1914, American ambassador to France, Myron T. Herrick, advocated taking an active role in mediation. Expression from our nation would have great weight in this crisis. A strong plea for delay and moderation from the President of the United States would meet with the respect and approval of Europe. President Wilson called for neutrality on an existential level, exhorting all Americans to observe neutrality in thought and in deed. To this end, the government prohibited American banks from loaning money to any belligerent nation, an act that the then Secretary of State and noted gold hater William Jennings Bryan hoped would both cement American neutrality and bring the war to a speedy conclusion. One cannot fight with an empty war chest, after all. This fiscal neutrality was not long-lived, as President Wilson reversed the decision in 1915 in response to the British Empire indicating their stockpiles of cash were about to run out, and thus they could not afford to continue buying American goods. Though protesting its neutrality at each turn, the United States was all too keen to do business with the Entente. With the metaphorical floodgates opened, American creditors sent a veritable tsunami of greenbacks to the British Empire, who turned right around and spent that money in the United States. But the British were not the only foreign shoppers in American markets, as the German Empire too sought to buy critical supplies from Uncle Sam. With the Western Front grinding to a stalemate, Germany hired ships from neutral countries to ferry food and other necessities purchased in the United States to the continent. But British naval supremacy and their blockade of Germany prevented much of it from getting through. The United States formally protested the British blockade in March of 1915, but the issue was quietly resolved in a meeting that saw the United States accept a British prohibition on selling food to Germany. When the blockade began impacting American cotton exports and threatening a vital pillar of the economy, Britain agreed to increase their cotton purchases to cover the shortfall. The upshot of all of this economic backroom dealing was an ostensibly neutral United States bowing to any small pressure from the British Empire to stop selling to Germany. Between 1914 to 1916, American trade with the German Empire plummeted by an economy-shattering 99%. Germany, backed to an economic wall, ordered a submarine blockade of Great Britain in retaliation. The United States protested, declaring this to be a violation of international law. This double standard, accepting a British blockade of Germany but not a German blockade of Britain, was acknowledged and waved away by President Wilson, who claimed that the British Navy did not threaten American lives in the same way that Germany's powerful fleet of submarines did. Wilson was unaware that Germany had only 9 submarines with which to enforce its blockade, hardly the mammoth threat to American life that he seemed to imagine. But the threat was still there, as the sinking of the Lusitania on March 7, 1915 would throw into sharp relief. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania, which killed 128 American citizens, was only one in a series of incidents that drove the American people further and further into the Entente's camp. The American public, already displeased at reports of German atrocities in Belgium, condemned the apparent sinking of a civilian vessel, and a diplomatic back and forth between Washington and Berlin ensued. Calls to enter the war rang in the halls of the capital, stopped only by German promises to scale back their submarine operations. America was pacified for now, but German Americans began to face prejudice at home, prejudice that would only intensify as the war progressed. Doubts of German Americans' loyalty would be continuously raised, with President Wilson declaring that any man who carries a hyphen with him carries a dagger that he is ready to plunge into the vitals of this republic when he gets ready. A nakedly hostile remark towards the largest non-English speaking group in the United States at the time. Government-stoked and homegrown paranoia escalated into violence, with German Americans shot, forced from their homes, or lynched, such as the case of Robert Paul Prager, a naturalized citizen who was lynched as a spy in April of 1918. This hatred was further stoked by an incredible act of sabotage. As previously mentioned, the Entente funneled much money to Yankee businesses, including munitions plants. Germany, unable to buy American weaponry thanks to the British blockade, began sending spies to find where the Entente was procuring and transporting weapons and munition, and to halt the flow of materiel, if possible. One such point of departure was Black Tom Island in New York Harbor, and on July 30th, 1916, German agents decided to have a little fireworks show. Igniting over $20 million worth of stockpile munitions, the Germans created one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in human history. A shockwave equivalent to a magnitude 5 earthquake was felt as far away as Philadelphia. The Statue of Liberty was damaged, and Black Tom Island was devastated. 110 by 50 meter crater left behind by the blast. Momentum was steadily building for the United States to enter the war, and in a display of military acumen that would make von Bismarck proud, German planners determined that the best way to keep the United States from entering wars was to actively target their merchant shipping and threaten American lives. Their rationale was simple. Bringing back unrestricted submarine warfare and sinking every ship headed to Britain, American or not, would starve the Entente into submission and end the war before the United States could even be moved to intervene. American ships were sunk, but President Wilson, just barely reelected, continued to demur, instead proclaiming armed neutrality by ordering American ships to be armed and authorized to fire on any aggressor. As their ships were raided and more were lost, the American public began clamoring for more than just armed neutrality. President Wilson continued to resist, but his efforts were ended by the infamous Zimmerman telegram, an order by the German foreign minister to his men in Mexico to court America's southern neighbor with promises of recovering territory in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico if they would invade the United States for the Central Powers. President Wilson, faced with all of these pressures, asked his cabinet for advice and found a single word on all of his advisors' lips. Both houses of the United States Congress passed resolutions supporting a war on Germany, and President Wilson formally requested Congress acknowledge a state of war had been created by Germany's actions rather than declare war outright. Congress responded by declaring war outright on April 6, 1917. Neutrality had ended, and it was time to go over there. The United States that entered the First World War was far from a military power. Isolationism had taken its toll on America's armed forces, leaving President Wilson to call up a minuscule standing army and dust off a navy of aging battleships. This, in a way, suited the president just fine, as Wilson believed the simple act of entering the war would tip the balance of power firmly in the favor of the Entente. While the British and French clamored for a fight to the finish, Wilson had his gaze fixed firmly on bringing the Germans to the negotiating table, and truly making this the war to end all wars. With the passage of the Selective Service Act, widespread conscription swelled the Americans' numbers. 2 million men had volunteered at the outbreak of war, and conscription would see 2.8 million more go over there. Whether volunteers or conscripts, Yankee troops began making their way to Europe. American troops landed on European shores in June of 1917. British and French commanders initially viewed the newly arrived Americans as reinforcements they could use to supplement their dwindling numbers. Some black soldiers, including the famous Harlem Hellfighters, were folded into the French army for the duration of the war. But General John Blackjack Pershing, infamous pacifier of the Philippines and commander of the American Expeditionary Force, sought to keep his men together in a unified American army. Pershing would largely get his way, and the first major engagement fought by the Americans would come the following summer, the Battle of Cantigny. A German salient at the village of Cantigny represented a golden opportunity to Pershing, who committed the 1st Infantry Division, better known as the Big Red One, to wipe it out. This strike would not only consolidate Entente lines, but Pershing hoped seeing the Americans in action would boost French confidence in their American comrades. At 6:45 a.m. on May 28, 1918, American infantry advanced under cover of French artillery. French tanks and flamethrower detachments advanced alongside the Yanks, and the combined force advanced up the slopes of Cantigny. Despite the help of the French gunners, tankers, and air support, the Americans were mauled during the uphill battle, yet they succeeded in capturing the village. German counterattacks began not long thereafter, but the Americans held firm, turning back 2 days of offensives and keeping a firm grip on Cantigny. The Americans accomplished their objective of not only taking the village, but also demonstrating that they could be counted on in a scrap. That scrap would come at Belleau Wood. A German offensive punched a hole in French lines, and the U.S. Marines were sent to plug the gap, pushing back the German assault and repelling numerous attempts to reopen the hole. From there, the Marines assaulted critical German positions in and around Belleau Wood, taking heavy casualties but accomplishing their objectives. It was among the trees of Belleau that Marine lore could be written. Captain Williams' refusal to retreat has become the motto of the 5th Marines, but Belleau Wood and Cantigny were only the prelude to the largest offensive in American military history to that point. From September 26th to November 11th, 1.2 million American troops embarked on the Meuse-Argonne offensive, aimed at capturing the railhead at Sedan. The offensive hit immediate stumbling blocks, as the Americans deployed inexperienced units already weakened by the Spanish flu. As the battle dragged on, both the Americans and the French sent troops to shore up the line. The Entente spirits would be lifted by an incredible act of heroism. Corporal Alvin York, a sharpshooting infantryman from the 82nd Infantry, now the 82nd Airborne, killed 25 and captured 132 Germans, a feat that would earn him the Medal of Honor. In a bid to break the stalemate, Big Red One assaulted the German stronghold at Côte du Châtillon, an imposing position that American Lieutenant General Robert Pollard described thus: not a line, a net, 4 kilometers deep, wire interlaced knee-high in grass, wire tangled devilishly in forests, pillboxes in succession, one covering another. No foxhole cover for gunners here, but concrete masonry, bits of trenches, more wire, a few light guns, defense in depth. The mighty First was repulsed by this net, but their loss was quickly avenged by your friend and mine, Douglas MacArthur, of the 42nd Rainbow Division, a patchwork of National Guard troops from states from Iowa to Alabama. The Guardsmen were able to succeed where the Big Red One failed, cracking Côte du Châtillon and turning the tide of the offensive, just in time for the armistice to be signed on November 11th. America would prove as active in peace as they were in the final days of the war. President Wilson brought his 14 points to the negotiations at Versailles and pushed for these principles to provide the bedrock for the post-war world. Wilson envisioned a League of Nations that would promote global peace and provide a diplomatic alternative to fighting. Wilson also sought to impose his peaceableness on Europe as a whole, dismantling the old colonial system and promoting self-determination for all peoples across the world. But Wilson's ideas were not universally accepted, with the previously mentioned Secretary of State Lansing remarking that promoting self-determination would raise hopes which can never be realized, and that the phrase is simply loaded with dynamite. The British and French were equally skeptical, with the French representative only reading Wilson's points when the German delegation requested that they be the basis of the peace talks. Fearing that the Americans and Germans would conclude a separate peace based on Wilson's ideas, the French and British accepted the 14 points as Germany requested. Wilson became quite popular for his peacemaking image, and his League of Nations was formally established in 1920. But neither the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War, nor the United States' entry into the League of Nations were approved by Congress, a sign that isolationism had returned to America's shores. America's war was over, for now. The stock market crash of 1929 and the resulting Great Depression were especially hard on the United States. In a desperate attempt to revitalize the economy, President Herbert Hoover signed the 1930 Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which raised customs duties to such an extent that imported goods became unaffordable to all but the wealthiest Americans. Instead of spurring domestic purchasing and production as intended, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs succeeded only in further damaging the world's economy. As other nations passed retaliatory tariffs against American exports, international trade plummeted by 65%, leading to the full collapse of banks in America and Europe, as the world economy only increased its tailspin. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president in 1933, he immediately set about implementing his New Deal program to strengthen America's economy and get people back to work. It is August 1939. World tensions are escalating at an alarming rate. The United States, a rising power in global affairs, becomes more active in deterring the spread of the Axis powers in Europe and the Pacific. These decisions would mark the beginning of a chapter that saw America confront its principles, its enemies, and its own legacy. After the First World War, the United States was keen to remain out of European affairs. Huge losses experienced during the war, combined with economic hardships from the Great Depression, prioritized domestic concerns over foreign affairs. America's isolationism was further influenced by the Nye Committee's findings in 1934. Their report suggested that propaganda, rather than genuine threats, had been a significant factor in the U.S.'s decision to enter the First World War. As a result, the U.S. government solidified its stance on remaining neutral in global conflicts by passing the Neutrality Acts between 1935 and 1937, which prevented arms, loans, and credit being sent to belligerent nations. However, the late 1930s showed unmistakable signs of a greater conflict brewing. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, while initially advocating for isolation, started to reconsider America's role on the global stage as Axis countries snatched territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa. He believed that it was essential to support the Allies indirectly. The cash and carry policy, introduced in November 1939, was one such initiative, which allowed European nations to purchase goods from the U.S. provided they handled transportation and payment. Another significant policy was the 1940 Destroyers for Bases deal, which facilitated the transfer of naval destroyers to Britain. In exchange, the U.S. was granted access to specific military bases within British territory. By March 1941, Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease Bill, which permitted him to sell or transfer any American defense articles to any government whose defense was also deemed vital to the defense of the United States. In April, this policy was extended to the nationalists in China, and later in October to the Soviets due to Operation Barbarossa. Parallel to these diplomatic and economic strategies, the U.S. Merchant Marine was actively involved in supporting the Allied efforts. Tasked with the crucial responsibility of transporting supplies, they continually risked confrontations with German and Japanese forces. Recognizing their importance, the U.S. initiated the production of cargo vessels known as Liberty ships from January 1941 onwards to bolster the Merchant Marine's capacity. A pivotal moment in the U.S.'s approach to the impending world conflict was the meeting between Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in August of 1941. The two leaders deliberated on potential strategies and mutual goals. While Roosevelt was keen on supporting the Allies further, he understood that a clear and direct reason was essential for the U.S. to commit militarily. That defining moment arrived in December 1941, with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, propelling the United States into the Second World War. As Germany conquered Europe, Japan set about acquiring the territories necessary for their co-prosperity. Beyond their gains in China, Japan incorporated French Indochina with German consent on September 22, 1940, occupying the former colonies until the Vichy French authorities bowed to the Japanese demands 4 days later. The next day, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, concluding a defensive alliance with Germany and Italy against the United States, who, by this time, had sought to cripple Japan's war effort with harsh sanctions and embargoes on much-needed resources like machine tools, aviation fuel, and scrap metal. The need for these resources, coupled with fears of an eventual oil embargo, drove Japan further toward establishing their co-prosperity sphere, which was deemed vital for the ongoing war in China. At home, the Japanese public were galvanized into support of the empire through intense repression and propaganda. Anti-subversion laws and controls over the intelligentsia were implemented to discourage liberal tendencies. Education on all levels was revoked to indoctrinate the youth, shaping them as future assets for Japanese supremacy over Asia and the Pacific. Imperial propagandists incorporated Shinto religious traditions in this effort, forming a state-sanctioned cult which served the empire's interest first and foremost. Above all this, Hirohito reigned as the divine figurehead, Emperor Showa. It was under his name that Japanese fighters dedicated their famous Banzai battle cry, charging recklessly into the enemy with bayonets, swords, or in the cockpit of a diving aircraft. Militarily, resources of the co-prosperity sphere would be secured under a national resource zone, which stretched from Burma to Melanesia. To protect this zone, the newly conquered territories would be defended by the army, while the navy secured its ocean lanes. This daunting task of naval superiority in the Pacific was made attainable thanks to Japan withdrawing from the Washington Naval Limitation Treaty in 1937, giving the Navy ample time to construct some of the largest battleships ever built, like the Yamato and the Musashi. At the same time,
what were they thinking?
Doubts about these super battleships.
This is why, like,
government to shift focus toward air
if you look at it
needed for the national defense zone.
On a wide scale,
staff, the most notable was its commander.
The Japanese and Nazis were terrible.
Who was a longtime believer in naval aviation, something which played a key role in his plans for Operation Z, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Operation Z envisioned a preemptive strike on the U.S. Pacific Fleet and her aircraft carriers, taking advantage of a delayed American response to quickly.
The Americans didn't really have to do much.
They
even tricked.
On December 7th, 1941, combined elements of Japan's first air fleet attacked without a declaration of war.
Tora, we'll win! This is gonna work! Yay, this is gonna work! Crash your planes into their ships! This is gonna work! This is gonna win the war! Bushido, bitches! Yeah! We're testing experiments on Chinese people and no one gives a shit!
The nature of these invasions succeeded thanks to the competence of commanders, with examples like the
Bitch, Japan is here! Get out of here, Britain, motherfucker!
Krieg assault that lasted only 70 days. On the home front, a mixture of excitement and anxiety lingered among the public.
Wow, we've taken over the world. What should we do now?
The Japanese expressed resolve in the face of a waking giant.
Uncle Sam emerged from the
By the end of 1941, the U.S. military faced challenges in terms of training and equipment. With less than 1,000 fighter planes already, there was a pressing need for swift action. Roosevelt responded by setting ambitious production targets, a planned creation of 60,000 planes, 45,000 tanks, 20,000 anti-aircraft guns, and 500,000 machine guns over the course of 1942. The War Production Board was initiated, overseeing the monumental task of converting civilian industries into wartime production units. Companies like Ford transitioned from cars to aircraft, while Lionel switched from toy trains to nautical equipment. Roosevelt's strategy was clear: outproduce the enemies at every juncture to deny their progress. As men left for the front lines, women stepped into roles in factories, fueling the war effort. In the early months of 1942, the Pacific Theater witnessed intense combat between U.S. and Japanese forces. The Doolittle raid boosted American morale, while the Battle of the Coral Sea halted the Japanese advance toward Australia. In the Philippines, American and Philippine troops made a last stand at Bataan before succumbing. This defeat led to the harrowing Bataan Death March, where thousands of captured soldiers endured brutal conditions and treatments by their Japanese captors. As these confrontations unfolded, June brought about a pivotal change. U.S. intelligence anticipated a major Japanese offensive against Midway Island. Prepared for the onslaught, American forces confronted a superior Japanese fleet. Despite the odds, U.S. aircraft managed to break through hostile fire, achieving a pivotal success. Dive bombers sank the Japanese carriers Soryu, Kaka, and Akagi within a matter of minutes. The Hiryu was later sunk the next day. In late 1942, Allied landings in Guadalcanal left the Japanese isolated into pockets of resistance, allowing the Allies to bypass them for bigger targets. Over 1943, the Japanese defense of the occupied Gilbert and Marshall Islands was marked by fierce fighting on both land and sea, with the Japanese suffering heavy losses due to the superior firepower of the Allied forces. The Midway victory signified a major shift, propelling the U.S. into its strategic island-hopping campaign, methodically advancing toward the Japanese mainland. The European theater began with Operation Torch in November 1942, starting with North Africa, a region where Germany and Italy had secured strategic coastal holds. Axis forces also controlled vast portions of the northern Mediterranean coast, which prevented Allied shipping in the region. Given the tensions between Britain and France's territorial interests, the American forces, led by General Dwight Eisenhower, bore the brunt of the operation. In North Africa, the U.S. faced seasoned German forces for the first time. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass, the U.S. suffered a considerable setback against the famed Africa Corps, grappling with poor leadership, ill-chosen defensive positions, and communication issues, leading to isolated units and equipment deficiencies. Their tanks, especially the M3 Lee, struggled against the superior German panzers. However, these early setbacks proved invaluable. Learning rapidly from their mistakes and underestimating the enemy's prowess, the Allies eventually trapped the Axis in northeastern Tunisia, forcing a surrender. This campaign exposed areas for improvement, but also laid the groundwork for future successes by providing essential combat experience. After their engagements in North Africa, the U.S. recognized the strategic importance of securing the Mediterranean. Here, the Allies launched Operation Husky in July 1943. This invasion of Sicily saw significant battles like the Battle of Gela, where American forces faced the full onslaught of combined German and Italian air raids, as well as armored assaults. With the successful capture of Sicily, the path to the Italian mainland was opened. September 1943 began with the landings at Salerno, followed by the amphibious assault at Anzio. Both operations met fierce German resistance, yet the Allies pressed on, encountering bloody battles like Monte Cassino, which witnessed a series of 4 hard-fought assaults before the fortified monastery was finally taken. The push northward continued, with the Gothic Line being another formidable German defensive position the Allies had to breach. By the end of 1943, Italy officially surrendered, but the battle against the German forces in the region raged on until May 1945. The drawn-out Italian campaign tied down significant German resources. These 26 divisions, who engaged in fierce battles against the Allies in Italy, were absent from the Western Front, potentially altering the dynamics of the battles in Normandy. 1944 heralded a pivotal phase. Even as battles raged in Italy, the Allies were already plotting their next significant move, the invasion of France. The D-Day invasion, officially termed Operation Overlord, was the centerpiece of this strategy. Amidst pressure to launch a second front in France, planning for this colossal operation did so under Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower's supervision. The strategy was audacious. Choosing Normandy as the invasion point was unexpected, given its challenging terrain and lack of ports. Eisenhower banked on this very unpredictability to catch the Germans off guard. The scale of Operation Overlord was staggering. Its enormity is best described in the American Heritage New History of World War II. The scope of Overlord defies imagination. One comparison is that Overlord was the equivalent of moving the Wisconsin cities of Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha, every man, woman, and child, with every vehicle across Lake Michigan in one night. The invasion of Normandy, codenamed Operation Overlord, commenced in the late hours of June 5, 1944, as an armada of C-47 transport planes carrying the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions made its way toward the Cotentin Peninsula. The elite paratroopers were entrusted with the crucial task of paving the way for the seaborne forces landing at Utah Beach just after dawn. The 101st would secure the causeways between the towns of Saint-Martin-du-Verreville and Poupeville, while the 82nd would capture the crossroads at the town of Saint-Mère-Église and secure the vital bridges across the Mérida River at Chef-du-Pont and La Fière-Menor. However, things go awry almost immediately as thick inland cloud cover and intense ground fire complicated things for the pilots. In the resulting chaos, most paratroopers miss their drop zones entirely as they are scattered all across the peninsula. Those who land safely nonetheless manage to quickly form makeshift units as they make their way to the nearest objective. In most cases, the confused German defenders are quickly overwhelmed. Saint-Mère-Église becomes the first French town to be liberated at around 4:30 a.m. as men of the 82nd dig in for the expected counterattack at the La Fière-Menor and Chef-du-Pont bridges to the west. The bulk of the 101st, due east, in the meantime, are in the process of clearing the 5 causeways to the landing beach, where the invasion force anchored just offshore is about to make its approach. The fleet's target was a 5-kilometer stretch of flat sandy beach just east of the airborne drop zones, codenamed Utah Beach. On board of the invasion fleet were the men of the 4th Infantry Division. Their objective was to establish a beachhead approximately 5 kilometers wide and 8 kilometers deep, with the ultimate goal to isolate the Cotentin Peninsula and capture the deep water port of Cherbourg. The first step in achieving this objective would be to break through the defensive position of the German 709th Static Infantry Division before advancing inland on the 5 main road exits. Besides flooding the nearby farm fields, the defenders had littered Utah Beach with 3 lines of obstacles, consisting of steel spikes and 9 wooden posts, as well as an array of anti-tank obstacles. The Utah sector was covered by 9 resistance nests, or Widerstandsnesten, which were manned by platoon-strength garrisons totaling about 700 troops. At 5:50, the fleet commences its bombardment of known German positions along the coast. Meanwhile, 270 bombers close in to further soften up the German strongpoints. However, hindered by poor visibility and anxious not to hit the invasion force, few pilots managed to hit their targets. At 6:30 hours, the first wave of 20 landing craft carrying part of the 8th Regiment approaches the beach's 2 sectors, Uncle Red and Pear Green. They're supposed to have landed behind a vanguard of amphibious DD or duplex drive tanks of the 70th Tank Battalion. The 70th tanks, however, are struggling to advance in the face of heavy headwinds and wade ashore late around 6:45 a.m. Luckily for the infantry, German resistance is lighter than expected, and besides some small arms fire, most casualties on the beach fall victim to artillery fire and mines. As it turns out, the strong swell that morning pulled the landing craft a mile or 1.5 kilometers southward to a sector less well defended than the previously designated landing site. Despite this good fortune, incoming artillery fire covering the various beach exits continues to cause casualties and hamper the advance throughout the early morning hours. A few miles inland, paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division resolve the issue as they conduct a set of daring assaults to silence the German batteries at Oldie and Breakour Manor. With these guns neutralized, the men of the 4th Infantry Division manage to overrun the remaining German beach defenses, and by 8:30 hours are ready to begin their advance up the causeways. Around noon, men of the 8th Regiment make contact with elements of the 101st Airborne Division at Poupeville. Further inland, at Saint-Marie-du-Mont, the regiment's 3rd Battalion prepares for a battle but finds the town already liberated by troopers of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who had cleared it in close quarters fighting earlier that day. The swift and mostly painless advance of the 8th Regiment is finally ordered to a halt at the end of the day at the crossroads at Les Fauges, some 10 kilometers inland. Meanwhile, men from the 12th and 22nd Regiments, landing in follow-up waves, move to secure the northern and northwestern flanks of the beachhead until they too penetrate around 10 kilometers into German-held territory. By the end of the day, the Utah operation had been a success. The 4th Infantry Division had achieved nearly all of its objectives in return for just 197 casualties, a number far lower than had been anticipated. The airborne divisions had suffered more heavily during their chaotic nighttime drop, but they too had managed to achieve the majority of their primary objectives. Within 24 hours, the Americans had established a firm beachhead on the Cotentin Peninsula through a mixture of exemplary skill and sheer luck. Some 23,250 men and 1,700 vehicles were ashore, with countless more to follow in the days, weeks, and months to come. These fortunes, however, would be in short supply for the American forces set to land further east. About 15 kilometers to the east of Utah Beach, a group of 225 elite soldiers from the 2nd Ranger Battalion, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, are headed towards the protruding cliffs of the Pointe du Hoc. The Rangers were entrusted with the daunting task of scaling the 30-meter-high cliffs to prevent its artillery battery from pummeling the American invasion beaches. Once on top, the Americans would have to fight their way through a series of defensive works and obstacles manned by men from the 716th Static Infantry Division in order to reach the gun emplacements. Things don't start out well for Rudder's men on D-Day. His troops are scheduled to land at 6:30, but due to a navigational mishap, they don't reach the beach until 10 past 7. The alerted Germans greet the Rangers with small arms fire, grenades, and even rocks as the latter begin making their way up the cliff. By 7:30 hours, the first exhausted Rangers have made their way to the top to find a moon-like landscape of deep craters created by preliminary bombardment. In a wild and frenzied scene, Rudder's men storm the emplacements only to find that the guns are not there. Fears that their sacrifice had been for nothing are soon alleviated when a patrol finds that the guns are intact in a field just behind the Pointe. With their main objective completed, the remaining Rangers dig in for the inevitable German counterattack and wait to be relieved by the invasion force landing at the neighboring Omaha Beach. The western end of Omaha Beach lay just about 6 kilometers to the east of Pointe du Hoc and stretched all the way from the area around Viryville-sur-Mer to the cliffs near Colleyville-sur-Mer, some 8 kilometers to the east. The most prominent characteristic of this wide and mostly sandy beach was a series of bluffs which offered a commanding view over the coastline. 5 natural draws between the bluffs offered the only exits off the beach for vehicles and heavy ordnance. The Germans were well aware of the potential for a landing in the Omaha sector and had constructed an intricate web of obstacles and resistance nests to cover the approaches to the draws. The beach itself had been littered with obstacles of all kinds. Soldiers disembarking in the shallows would first have to traverse an array of mined stakes and iron frames, as well as hedgehog anti-tank obstacles. Barbed wire covered the seawall and dunes further on, while the draws were blocked off by minefields and concrete walls, as well as remote-controlled flamethrowers. Furthermore, in order for soldiers in most sectors to even reach the draws, they would have to cross the shelf, which was a roughly football field-sized gap of open ground between the seawall and the base of the bluffs. But to even get to that point, the Americans would have to brave a deadly and sophisticated set of resistance nests. Most of these strong points were hidden from sight, camouflaged, and placed at an angle to protect them from enemy fire. The slight curve of the coastline also meant that resistance nests on both the eastern and western edges of the beach could provide interlocking fields of fire across the landing ground. 3 additional resistance nests were positioned behind the bluffs should the invaders manage to break through. In total, the resistance nests in the Omaha sector were composed of 8 big gun emplacements, 35 pillboxes, 18 anti-tank guns, and 85 machine gun nests. Being the largest and the most well-defended of the 2 American beaches, Allied Command had assigned both the 29th Infantry Division as well as the veteran 1st Infantry Division to secure the bluffs by 7:30 hours, link up with the British forces advancing from Gold Beach at Port-en-Besson, and securing an overall beachhead 26 kilometers wide and 8 kilometers deep. At 5:55 hours, the preliminary air and naval bombardment begins, pounding the German positions, but once again the bomber pilots delay too long and end up missing their target entirely. With the German defenses still intact, the first wave begins to make its approach at 6:30. Some landing craft are hit as they close in on the beach, and many soldiers are cut down. To make matters worse, almost all of the DD tanks that were supposed to land ahead of the infantry have floundered in the rough channel waters after having been launched far too early at 5.5 kilometers from the shore. Within minutes, Companies A and F of the 116th Infantry Regiment landing at Dog Green and Dog Red are virtually wiped out. However, not every sector of Omaha is as well defended. At Dog White, G Company reaches the base of the beach within 4 minutes of landing, while at Fox Red, at the far eastern end of Omaha, men from the 16th Regiment make use of the cliffs in that sector to shield themselves from enemy fire.
most of them.
At around 8 o'clock, a group of men under command of General Norman Cota in the Dog White sector manage to blow a hole in the barbed wire in the Dog White sector and advance up the steep bluffs to take out WN-70 before moving on to clear the Vierville draw.
Right.
To the east, in the Fox sector, a group of soldiers led by Lieutenant Jimmy W. Monteith similarly managed to fight their way up the exit and take out WN-60. The majority of the troops near the draws are, however, still hopelessly pinned down, and their sectors quickly become congested with the arrival of subsequent waves. To make matters worse, the incoming tide begins to
Yeah,
shallow
it's
the
all,
wounded and the dead,
that's
while
all
slowly
the
reducing the
ones.
size of the beach even further. Sensing catastrophe, a group of U.S. Navy destroyers brave enemy fire as they move in as close as 800 meters from the shoreline. With their direct fire support, 8 German gun emplacements are knocked out, providing enough of an opening for the ground troops to recontinue their advance up the bluffs. With the German defenses now being breached in several sectors, the tide begins to turn in the Americans' favor. The assault teams on the bluffs quickly swing west and east to flank the remaining German positions, while the other groups advance on the towns of Vierville and Colleyville-sur-Mer. By the end of the day, the Americans at Omaha had secured the bluffs, but the advance off the beach had only reached 1.5 kilometers inland. This precarious foothold on the Normandy coast had come at the cost of over 4,000 U.S. casualties. Still, Omaha had been secured, and the Germans lacked the strength to attempt to push the Americans back into the channel. Following the initial landings in Normandy, the Allies made significant progress into French territory, marking notable victories, including the iconic liberation of Paris. Importantly, they were beginning to position themselves close to the Rhine. However, as they pushed deeper into France, the logistical challenges mounted. Distance from the initial beachheads in Normandy strained their supply lines, leading to a critical gasoline shortage that threatened to halt their momentum. This logistical challenge catalyzed a strategic debate among the top brass. British General Bernard Montgomery believed that pausing General George S. Patton's advance and relocating crucial resources to his own forces would allow for a swift push toward Berlin. In contrast, Patton was confident in leading the offensive himself. Eisenhower, responsible for the overarching strategy, found merit in Montgomery's approach. In September 1944, the Allies launched Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands, aiming to seize key bridges to pave a path into Germany. The operation was split into 2 phases, Market and Garden. The airborne component, Market, saw the U.S. 101st Airborne capturing Eindhoven's bridges. The airborne component, Market, saw the U.S.'s 101st Airborne capturing Eindhoven's bridges, while the 82nd targeted Nijmegen. Concurrently, Garden involved ground troops advancing to support the airborne units, hoping to exploit the newly secured routes. While the operation saw initial successes, it met staunch resistance by German forces, especially at Arnhem, preventing the full achievement of Operation Market Garden's objectives. The shadows have just begun to lengthen in the streets of Aachen, and an American rifle team creeps cautiously along an ancient street, backs to imposing Gothic architecture. Though scarred by artillery fire, the giant stone monuments still retain the grandeur of a former capital city. Behind the team, an M4 Sherman slowly crawls into the open, and the street behind the tank erupts in flame. One GI snaps toward the source of the misdirected rocket, and instead of a fanatic SS grenadier, his eyes meet the terrified gaze of a trembling old man. A motley crew of elders and boys fire down at the Americans with a hodgepodge of antique firearms. The GI's view is obscured by smoke and debris as the Sherman's main gun fires into the ground floor of the closest building, bringing it crashing down with a roar of falling masonry. The GIs come to a grim realization. Even in their chaotic desperation, the Germans intend to make them pay for every inch of Aachen in blood. Unfortunately for Adolf Hitler, the Nazi governors of Aachen had taken one look at the onrushing Allied armies and promptly abandoned the civilian population to its fate. Infuriated by this display of cowardice, Hitler had the officials arrested by the SS and shipped off to the Eastern Front. By the time General Gerhard von Schwerin dragged the shattered remnants of his 116th Panzer Division through the city, he found it full of thousands of terrified civilians and a ragtag collection of Volkssturm militia. Knowing a lost cause when he saw one, von Schwerin paused just long enough to leave a letter at the post office, designating Aachen as an open city for the incoming Allied forces. The deeply unlucky general then ran headfirst into orders coming the other direction, telling him to turn his division around and return to the city for a last stand. Naturally, he had been gone just long enough for a sharp-eyed Schutzstaffel to have found the letter, and he was promptly relieved of command. Defense of the sector now fell on the shoulders of Lieutenant General Friedrich J. Kochling's 81st Corps, consisting mainly of 2 Volksgrenadier and 2 infantry divisions. While the Germans scrambled to put together a viable strategy, the 3 Army Corps of the American First Army under General Courtney H. Hodges crept closer and closer. Despite the apparently tenuous nature of the German defenses, nobody was under any illusions about the meat grinder that lay ahead. Sergeant Harley Reynolds of the Bloody 1st Division described the mood thusly. I can remember the talk and comments about the city of Aachen, that no way would the Germans give up this city without a fight to the last German standing. We talked about this among the ranks. I felt there was a good chance that they would possibly drive us back with a big counterattack. We were a finger sticking out in front of the US line, a very dangerous position. Surprisingly enough, the initial skirmishes that took place as the First Army moved to breach the west wall around Aachen in early September proceeded with minimal casualties. While 3 infantry regiments pushed through the forest to the west side of the city, 2 armored regiments began a flanking attack towards the town of Stolberg. At first, the attackers were daunted by the sheer scale of the defensive works they encountered. Hundreds of pillboxes and dozens of bunkers with overlapping fields of fire, overlooking extensive minefields and concrete anti-tank obstacles. Yet, resistance was light, as the Eastern Front was still occupying the majority of German manpower, leaving only a scattering of exhausted veterans and walking wounded to man a network of defenses originally intended to be garrisoned by entire armies. Unfortunately, General Courtney's swift progress was ground to an abrupt halt by factors beyond his control. granting the Germans the critical break they needed to get their act together. The
CG?
Allied supply situation had been shaky at best since the Normandy landings, and it would not improve for the boys near Aachen. As September rolled in,
does it just
the
look weird
planners of
'cause it's-
Operation Market Garden, which occurred at about the same time, seemingly did their best to waste as much fuel, ammunition, and manpower as possible in their abortive attempt to breach German lines in the Netherlands. Having been bumped far down the priority list, the men of the First Army trudged onwards, trying to make best use of the good weather whilst their supplies dwindled. On the 22nd of September, the same day Operation Market Garden ended, the 16th Infantry Regiment was on the verge of capturing the town of Eilendorf, just south of Aachen, when they abruptly came under massive artillery fire. As the smoke cleared, the German 12th Infantry Division arrived to politely inform the Allies that the good times were over, and the real fight had just begun. Though few in number, the professional soldiers of the 12th had been supplemented by a swarm of Volkssturm militia, and traumatized Americans later recalled the sight of women and children fighting with pistols, knives, and even Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. One commander reported that the Germans had simply gone mad and are bent on destroying themselves. The Americans were able to hold their positions during the savage engagement, but were prevented from advancing just long enough for heavy cloud cover to descend over the region, eliminating the possibility of close air support. Now experiencing major shortages of fuel, heavy munitions, and spare parts for armored vehicles, the frustrated men of the First Army were forced to halt all offensive operations until the first week of October. During this critical period, Lieutenant General Cochling's 81st Corps was heavily reinforced. The exact number of German soldiers committed to the battle is impossible to determine, but by the 2nd of October, around 24,000 raw recruits, traumatized veterans, SS fanatics, and terrified Volkssturm stood ready to give their lives to defend the capital of the actual Thousand-Year Reich. Together, they huddled in their bunkers and pillboxes as the Allies saturated the region with artillery fire and bombing raids between September 27th and October 2nd, after which the ground offensive resumed. Having now partially enveloped Aachen, the First Army sought to break through German lines in the north to encircle the old capital completely. Sadly for the Americans, the West Wall absorbed the bombardment with barely a scratch, forcing the infantry to begin the incredible laborious process of dislodging the defenders one fortification at a time. In the town of Übach-Pallenberg, GIs engaged in brutal urban warfare with the German defenders, which often devolved into both sides flinging grenades at each other until entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. With most of the bridges in the region having been destroyed, American armored forces were constantly delayed by river crossings and were unable to provide support for the infantry. By the end of just the first day of fighting, the leading American 117th Infantry Battalion had lost 146 men. Another battalion had 58 wounded and 12 dead. Over 50 pillboxes had been destroyed or captured, but hundreds still lay between the First Army and victory in the sector. Over the next few days, the vicious urban warfare intensified, and GIs quickly learned to approach enemy pillboxes only if flamethrowers or demolition charges were available. Defenders were roasted in their concrete shells or blasted into ruin by tanks and self-propelled guns, but rarely chose to surrender. All the while, German reinforcements raced into the sector, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division. By the 7th of October, the Allies had successfully secured the area around Übach-Pallenberg and pushed southwards as far as Alsdorf, but had yet to enter Aachen itself, which was now home to about 5,000 enemy troops. Instead, fighting was concentrated around the suburbs, with the 26th Infantry Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Darrell M. Daniel, slowly clawing a foothold out of the Ratha-Erde district. Once this area was secured, plans were made for the regiment to push north into the heart of the city. In an effort to avert a bloodbath, Lieutenant General Clarence R. Hubner of the 1st Infantry Division sent an ultimatum to the commander of German forces in Aachen, Colonel Gerhard Wilk, on October 10th. In his letter, Hubner demanded the city surrender or be bombed to oblivion. But Aachen was now fully in the grip of the SS, who were quite ready to execute any soldier who showed even a hint of cowardice. Beyond this fear of capital punishment, the soldiers defending the Aachen section of the West Wall knew that they were now fighting to protect the very heartland of Germany. As a result, the offer was rejected, and Colonel Wilk assumed full responsibility for the defense after establishing his headquarters in the north side of the city. The 11th of October saw a shift in Allied tactics. With their supply situation stabilizing, mass artillery bombardment commenced on Aachen and the surrounding German-held townships. Tired of the bloody street fighting, the Americans were ready to simply level every building that could feasibly hold enemy combatants. This forced the Germans onto the offensive, but their efforts to reclaim the high ground surrounding Aachen all ended in failure. By this point, the picturesque city had been subjected to an on-and-off bombardment for weeks, as well as numerous air raids, but the Gothic architecture had proven surprisingly resilient. With the majority of the 1st Infantry Division holding off German counterattacks, 2 battalions of the 26th Infantry Regiment began to move through the industrial district between Ratha-Erde and the suburb of Hagen. Their objectives were 3 hills dominating Aachen's northern quarter, which contained the bulk of the 246th Volksgrenadiers and Colonel Wilk's headquarters. By the 12th, the 2nd and 3rd battalions had managed to clear out the industrial district and were ready to enter the narrow, twisted maze of streets that made up the inner city. Knowing that massing his troops would lead to a slaughter, Colonel Daniel split up his men into assault platoons, assigning a single M4 Sherman, or self-propelled gun, to each unit. Upon seeing the massive stone structures at the heart of the city, Daniels issued simple instructions: knock them all down. Despite letting their artillery rain fire over 10,000 shells prior to the main assault, the first American soldiers to set foot in Aachen were still greeted with a hail of machine gun fire, forcing them to scramble for cover in the imposing stone buildings that lined the narrow streets. Here, they were ambushed by wild-eyed Volkssturm, who sprung from hidden basements and cellars to engage the GIs in hand-to-hand combat. The tanks fared little better, being at the mercy of hidden anti-tank guns and lone German soldiers armed with Panzerfausts or sticky grenades. Once again, the attackers were forced to go room by room, checking for Germans waiting to ambush them the instant their backs were turned. As they crawled closer to their objectives, 2nd Battalion was confronted by increasingly tough fortifications, including hardened air raid shelters. Improvising, Colonel John T. Corley ordered an M12 155mm gun mortar carriage to lumber through the streets, the exposed crew no doubt ducking at every shadow as they wheeled into position to blast holes in enemy strongholds at point-blank range. Delighted with the results of the attack, Corley rewarded the M12's crew by informing them they would be staying with his men as they advanced deeper into the city. The rest of the day was spent advancing towards Observatory Hill, so named for the observation tower built upon its nearly 900-foot tall crescent. By the end of the 13th, 3rd Battalion had managed to reach the base of one of these 3 hills they had been assigned to capture, prompting Colonel Wilk to request reinforcements from the German divisions still counterattacking to the east. Thanks to the dense urban terrain, several hundred troops and at least a half-dozen assault guns slipped through the tenuous Allied line the next day. They were just in time to engage Colonel Corley's men as they attacked Wilk's headquarters at Farwick Park, where an intense battle raged until the early evening. But as Corley prepared to renew his advance, he was countermanded by Colonel Hubner. The forces outside Aachen had launched another attack, tying up all available reserves. For over 24 hours, General Cochling's 81st Corps battered the beleaguered 1st Division until both sides were utterly exhausted. But aided by artillery and air support, the Americans were able to dig in and weather the assault, then strike back at the collapsing German line with a decisive blow. Finally, the jaws of the Allied pincer movement were able to slam shut, completely encircling Aachen and leaving Colonel Wilk isolated from further reinforcements. Their eastern flank now secure, the 1st Army was able to take its time mopping up the remaining Germans in Aachen. On the 18th, 2nd Battalion resumed its attack on Farwick Park, driving the defenders into the basement with an artillery barrage before sending assault squads in to secure the Fellenhof Hotel. Though Colonel Wilk had already left the hotel, the defenders put up a tremendous fight, hurling grenades from every entrance and forcing GIs back. In the end, Colonel Corley had to threaten to demolish the entire structure before the Germans finally agreed to surrender.
I'll finish this.
The loss of Farwick Park was a death blow to the German resistance in Aachen, and not even a written order from Colonel Wilk encouraging his troops to fight to the last man inspired much determination. With huge swaths of the city now under American control, the survivors of the 246th Volksgrenadiers were hemmed in on their remaining hilltops, with Observatory Hill falling to the 2nd Battalion on the 19th. By now, Aachen was no more than a mound of rubble, as the Americans systematically demolished any building that could even potentially harbor enemy combatants. With essentially no ground left to go, Colonel Wilk was finally cornered in an air raid shelter on the 20th. As Corley wheeled his favorite 155mm gun into position outside the fortress, Wilk realized the game was up and dispatched several American POWs to carry a message of surrender to the besiegers. This victory served as a prelude to the challenges in the Hürtgen Forest. Here, amidst snow-laden terrain and minefields, American troops faced dogged German defenses, incurring heavy casualties. December marked a German resurgence with a surprise counteroffensive in the Ardennes, aiming to exploit the thinly spread lines of the U.S. 12th Army Group. In the snowdrifts of Bastogne, a young GI grips his rifle. The Americans stand ready to meet their foes, eager to have a stand-up fight after nights of fruitless watches. Our GI scans the tree line, expecting to see black-clad SS soldiers burst forth into his firing line. Gunfire in the distance, the din of combat. Finally, some action. Figures emerge from the trees, and he raises his rifle to... those aren't Germans. As his comrades from the 99th Division dive into cover, scrambling to get as far away from the forest as they can, our GI grabs a runner by the arm. What's going on? The haggard soldier from the 99th barely gets it out. The 99th is gone, and the SS who wiped them out are right behind them. The Battle of the Bulge was Nazi Germany's final attempt to wrestle back control of the war on the Western Front. At this stage of the war, Germany was hemmed in on 3 sides, and the Nazis had few options to relieve the pressure. An offensive in the east would simply be swallowed by the immense Soviet Red Army, while doubling down on the Italian front would have only a marginal impact. To Hitler, the natural option was a surprise push across the relatively lightly defended Ardennes and a drive toward the Dutch coast to force a wedge between the Commonwealth and American forces, and if he was lucky, force the Allies into a second evacuation like Dunkirk. The Wehrmacht laid out their plans in the utmost secrecy, codenaming the offensive Operation Wacht am Rhein after a Prussian patriotic anthem. Only a handful of Hitler's closest commanders knew of the plan, and each was forced to sign a pledge of secrecy on pain of death before learning its details. Regimental commanders, meanwhile, were only to be briefed the day before the attack was to take place. To avoid tipping off the Americans, troops moved across the thickly forested Eifel region during the night and sheltered in villages by day, with their vehicles concealed in barns. Maps were distributed only at the very last moment, and total radio silence was observed. Consequently, Allied air reconnaissance completely failed to notice these new troop concentrations. Though made a high priority, Wacht am Rhein was a divisive operation. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel was an ardent supporter, but many other commanders remained skeptical, believing the units would be better utilized in the defense of the Reich. General Siegfried Westphal was among those who did not believe the available forces could ever reach the River Meuse, but refrained from raising any objections for fear of being labeled a defeatist. Gerd von Rundstedt and Walter Model also agreed this was simply one of Hitler's map fantasies. Although Model saw the offensive as a final gamble he had no choice but to carry out. The Allies certainly didn't expect an attack. The highest echelons of Allied command assumed the Germans were preparing a counterattack against an American crossing of the River Rohr. On the eve of the offensive, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery said the shortages of German manpower, equipment, and resources precluded any offensive action on their part. He wasn't far wrong. Field commanders knew fuel would be a major problem, particularly in the difficult terrain of the Ardennes. The 6th Panzer Army under Sepp Dietrich would advance in the north. The 5th Panzer Army under Hasso von Manteuffel in the center, and Erich Brandenberger's 7th Army would take the south. The two panzer forces were to push toward Antwerp, while the infantry would protect the southern flank against General George S. Patton's 3rd Army. Dietrich was to cross the vital bridges over the River Meuse within the first 24 hours of the assault before pushing on to Antwerp. Manteuffel, meanwhile, would capture Brussels. To reach the Meuse, the Germans first had to pass through the junctions at Saint-Vit and Bastogne, the capture of which was crucial for maintaining a stream of supplies to the advancing forces. The 6th Panzer Army, advancing toward Monschau, was given special priority by Hitler. It included the elite of the Waffen-SS, most notably Kampfgruppe Peiper, led by its ruthless namesake. Peiper's unit, consisting of roughly 4,800 men and 800 vehicles, would form the vanguard of the northern thrust. The offensive would be preceded by Operation Greif, during which a special brigade, trained under the command of SS Colonel Otto Skrzynski, was to adopt American customs and infiltrate enemy lines dressed as American soldiers to capture key bridges. 8 of his 9 Jeep teams managed to slip through the net undetected, cutting wires, tampering with road signs, and committing minor acts of sabotage. One even managed to misdirect an entire infantry regiment. The Germans would not find themselves facing the cream of America's fighting men. The American defenders comprised 6 divisions of 7th Corps, most of them brand new to the field or redeployed to the Ardennes as a kind of working vacation after intense battle. Days before the attack, the 106th Infantry Division heard tanks and other vehicles moving to their section of the front, but their inexperience gave them no idea what it meant. Even the experienced 4th Infantry Division assumed the engine noises were merely one of Volksgrenadier Division replacing another. In the early hours of December 16th, the Americans were torn from sleep by the screams of rockets and bone-rattling pounding of field guns. Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army had opened fire against known U.S. Army positions in the first action of the battle. As the GIs scrambled out of their sleeping bags, Manteuffel, who had decided to ignore Hitler's insistence on an opening artillery barrage, crossed the River Sauer in secret, preferring to take the sleeping Americans by surprise. As he did so, engineer battalions began bridging the River Our so the 116th, 2nd, and 130th Panzer Lehr could follow. Evidently, the gambit succeeded. A number of American soldiers panicked and fled. One officer acknowledged that a few men broke under the strain, wetting themselves repeatedly, or vomiting, or showing other severe symptoms. Many American positions were surrounded and captured, but others were defended in stunning acts of bravery, such as when Lieutenant Lyle J. Booth Jr. of the 99th
It'll be fun to try them out
at
next time.
Lanzarote for the entire day with only 18 men. They killed and wounded over 400 enemies at a cost of just 1 life. The fierce resistance of the 99th held up Kampfgruppe Peiper in particular. In his impatience, Peiper ordered his vehicles to push forward rapidly and to ruthlessly run down anything in their way, even driving them through the American minefield at the cost of 5 panzers. Although the element of surprise counted for a lot, the German advance was not a total success, and suffered from numerous delays and errors. Early in the morning, the 326th Volksgrenadier Division advanced with the aim of blocking the roads to Oppen and Aachen, and prevent any American reinforcements coming in from the north. However, the Germans' own artificial moonlight, a glow created by bouncing searchlights off clouds, silhouetted the Volksgrenadiers perfectly against the mist and snow, and the Americans had themselves a turkey shoot, forcing the 326th back within an hour. The weather was a constant irritation. German forces experienced horrendous conditions on the road and in terms of visibility, which meant while they struggled to move, the Allies also struggled to impose their air power over the battlefield. Nevertheless, on December 17th, the Germans were satisfied with their progress, and morale was high. A soldier in the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division wrote, "I think the war in the West is again turning. The main thing is that the war will soon be decided, and I will be coming home again to my dear wife, and we can again build a new home." That day, Eisenhower ordered all reserve formations to the front. He decided that Bastogne, through which the main roads leading to the Meuse passed, was an obvious place to block the German advance. The 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were immediately dispatched. If the 101st could reach Bastogne before Manteuffel's spearhead, perhaps the Screaming Eagles could turn the tide. Eisenhower had ample reason to be concerned. Peiper had chosen to ignore the route mapped out by Hitler due to muddy tracks, instead capturing Hunsfeld and Büningen, where he seized a fuel dump unopposed. At each village, his men massacred American POWs and local villagers. Peiper committed his most heinous crime at Bougny. Here, he murdered 84 POWs of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion in what would become one of the most infamous episodes on the Western Front. Hereafter, rumors of the SS massacres spread fear among the American forces. In the south, Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army moved against the 28th Division, surrounding the ancient town of Clairvaux, which was defended heroically but ultimately fruitlessly by outnumbered and outgunned men. Despite this brave defense, 1st Army HQ ended the day in somber spirits, fearing the Germans were on the verge of forming vital bridgeheads over the Meuse. The next day, the Germans continued their assault, overrunning American positions in an attack against the last battalion of the 2nd Division. Just 197 Americans survived the assault. Their final stand, combined with artillery support, helped save the rest of the division. 1st Army HQ was hastily evacuated and moved to Chaudefontaine, but defenders at Trois Ponts managed to stave off Panzer Grenadiers trying to cross the river. Searching for alternative routes, Piper found the forested slopes at La Glaise impossible to traverse, and the bridge over the river Lienne already blown up. Resistance prevented the Germans from reaching Bastogne, but U.S. headquarters was still struck by paralysis. By the end of the day, General Bradley still had no idea 1st Army HQ had been abandoned. The Americans were fighting and dying to protect an empty house. On the 19th, Bradley and General Patton were summoned to Verdun to meet Eisenhower. The meeting led to a reorganization of the Allied defense, and thanks to intercepted German communications, they now had a clearer idea of the lay of the land. Eisenhower insisted there would be no withdrawal behind the Meuse. Instead, Alexander Patches said...
Switch my name to... I'll be right back. There we go. Okay, I'll be right back.
This little piggy squealed when I smoked him like a greasy slab of sausage.
Go, Freddy!
You choose her or not choose wrong. With a skipper heart, she's one cool, calm, DK. Donkey Kong. He has no style. He has no grace. This Kong has a funny face. He can handstand when he needs to and stretch his arms out just for you. Inflate himself just like a balloon. This crazy Kong just digs his tune. DK. Donkey Kong. DK. Donkey Kong. DK. Donkey Kong is here. He's back again and about time too. And this time, he's in the mood. He can fly real high with his jetpack on. With his pistols out. He's one tough Kong. He'll make you smile when he plays his tune. But gremlins beware, cause he's after you. DK. Donkey Kong. Finally, he's here for you. It's the last member of the DK crew. This Kong's so strong, it isn't funny. Can make a gremlin cry out for mommy. Can pick up a boulder with relative ease. Makes crushing rocks seem such a breeze. He may move slow, he can't jump high, but this Kong's one hell of a guy. Come on, Cranky, take it to the fridge. Walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, nuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. Oh yeah, walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells. Grapes, melons, oranges, and coconut shells. You choose her or not choose for the skip.
Hello. I'm back. Ba 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 ba. Be. Boy be. Can I have our music? We sleep all day and rock the night. We just get up to start another fight. We kiss and then we bite. We are train wrecks. You don't keep cussing on the slab. If you get out, 'cause I can't keep a job. We don't update our blogs, we are train wrecks. People love to tell us what to do. That's just 'cause they're jealous of me and you. We're taking places to catch. We're taking cuts 'cause both our cars are trash. But we're still kicking ass. We are train wrecks. Train wrecks. Yeah. We're still kicking ass. We are train wrecks. We think it's uncool to be on time. Mooching off our friends is not a federal crime. So they will cut critics down to size. And Kesha didn't party in disguise. We fall, but then we rise. We are train wrecks. Train wrecks. That's the story of our lives. We are train wrecks. Train wrecks. That's the story of our lives. We are train wrecks. Do I like this? I don't remember why I like this song. I like that little last part. It's all melodic.
My stupid mouth has got me in trouble. I said too much again.
Is this from Shrek? You bitch.
Sometime the wind is blowing outside with the stress. I know what I'm doing in the city. The sun is always in my eyes. It crashes
Through the windows and I'm sleeping on the couch. When I came to visit you, that's when I knew that I could never have you. I knew that before you did. So I'm going stupid and live this burning like there's always been. I've never been so alone, and I've never been so alive. There's a view on a motorcycle drive by, the cigarette ash flies in your eyes and you don't mind if you smile. Say the world, it doesn't fit with you. I don't believe you, you're so serene. Reading through the universe, your axis on its tilt. Give it to me, I hope you take a piece of me with you. There are things I would like to do that you don't believe in. I would like to build something, but you'll never see it happening. And this is burning like there's always been. I've never been so alone, and I've never been so alive. And this is burning. There is this burning. Yeah.
I have a plan.
Where's the soul, I wanna know? New York City's evil. The surface is everything, but I could never do that. Someone would see through that. And this is this last time we're being friends again. I'll get over you, you won't know who I am. And this is burning, that's just there's always been. I've never been so alone, and I've never been so alive.
So alive. I go home, the street comes stop playing. I've had a lot on the water. Alone. Taste the sun, taste the rain. I'm not
thinking of you again.
Summer dies, the stars rise. The sun goes down in my eyes. See this golden wave. Darkness.
What's that thing?
And I've never been so
Ordnance.
alone.
And it's flying 7-7.
Been so alive.
Okay. Exactly what I want.
that you can dim. In spite of the evidence, there's something still missing. With some of the rumors told, a taste of what
Oh,
was
Lord.
well. Did Victoria wound his soul? Did she bid him farewell? We'll lay down today. Until we fade away. We'll lay down today.
I can do anything.
We slowly fade away.
We might have something to cast on their creature. Yep. Oh, and then hang life. That's pretty crazy.
Inside his home, it holds the many clues to my suspicion.
They can save it? They probably can. They just drew like a lot of cards. That's crazy. Are you serious?
An open door, I walk on through into his bedroom, feeling as cold as outside. The walls disappear as some woman who's screaming.
I'm about to say it's game. They drew a lot of cards. I won't even challenge it. You pay life to draw that many cards.
When I look to the ocean, it feels like home. Wish the waves could follow me everywhere I go, but I can't move with it. One thing I know is that I'm meant to be alone. Follow, 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 follow me home. If it don't, it'll be alright. I'll be gone in the morning light. Follow me, follow, 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 follow me home. Hanging on to the last of time. Can't imagine the moment's gone. So I'm alone. I have felt burning stares and judging eyes, certain they only see just my outside. I'll never be for them, that's clear.
Arlo was alright. It wasn't really probably the best movie you could make, I guess. Or if Netflix. The Netflix show.
hand, I'm here today. It's a chance, leap of faith. What it be, what we do with it? Without
I enjoyed it, but not really impressed by it. It's old now. Some of the music on this playlist I haven't heard in a while. I liked it like a long time ago. That was bad. Probably should have got some. Goddamn laundry. I hate that.
This is my home, and I don't appreciate it when people all in a day's work.
Patrol Liliana.
Follow me home.
Oops. What is this? I hate Radiohead. Away. I will listen to Passion Pit instead. See this.
Laugh all you want. You get to be my protege.
Get your -2, -1 out of there, yeah. Stop that. I need a... Good card. I need to do some damage. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Lord. But it doesn't mean a goddamn thing. What?
You can listen if you want, you can listen if you don't. Yeah, they'll talk, yeah, they'll even sing. Everybody now. They come singing through the windows, singing through the trees. Yeah, they're singing through the bright spring leaves. Everybody now.
Can I test?
Yeah, they love you and they need you, but someday you're gonna need to find some other kind of place to go.
I have a plan.
Now you're standing in the kitchen and you're pouring out a drink. Well, there's a very obvious difference, and it's that one of us can think. If there's a bump in the road, yeah, you fix it. But for me, I'll just run
Yay.
But tonight you've got
Everything's about to fun and destroy itself. So fuck that.
a place to go.
Never know that some people will go. Yes, some people been hurt.
You can tell no way by the slightest crook in the neck or the blink of an eye. Well, then they'll see what they say and they'll do what they
They're gonna be able to do their dumb shit then.
mean a goddamn thing. You can listen if you want, you can listen if
I'm
you
gonna have
don't.
to
Yeah, they'll talk, yeah, they'll even sing.
think of some shit. Yeah, that's about.
They come singing through
Go him.
I'll just indemnify you.
So they're gonna get their little emblem bullshit. So. Or what?
Soon you'll be left with nothing.
Wait, X C plus the number of zombies you can kill? Oh. That can't be it. Wow.
Nobody
They
knows
destroy that on
Dominaria's
Buff.
shadows like me. All in a day's work.
Do I have a count? Lose one life. At the beginning of your upbeat, you lose one moment. And that zombies one. When a zombie jumping, you control the power. Okay. Oh my lord. So 6 mana? Damn. Uh-oh. If only you could see the stranger next to me. You promise that you're done, but I can't tell you from the trust. Oh, damn. God damn it, dude. I need mana. Or a copy spell. If only you could see. I need a copy still. Man. fuck if they have something else. Another destroy all spell. Ah! Oh, I should have took that shit. It's fine. This is actually what I really need. Too many zombies. Shit. Fuck. This is... I think it's game. Oh, fuck me. Ugh. After 7 a.m. I mean, I got the block, shit. That's actually really good. Now I can just guess something else. Should I guess that? Will I be able to guess? DGS cover up? Oh shit, nice. Are you not please spend this time and just fight? Hell no. Stop this +1/+1 shit, please. Meet me on the highway, smoking, blowing, let's race. Turn the volume up and you just got that look on your face. The volume up, baby, lift your hands up and dance.
I need to workshop on this theory.
Thank you, Ralph. You sacrificed yourself for the win! I got big, it's about me. I'm about to break. This is my fate. Oh Lord, I'm sorry. Too cloudy. I did not even see you till now. Mr. Harry, I got a song for you. Yee. Give me it. I'm here now. Sorry. This was a really insane fight. pressure, Skindred. I'll do it for you. Oh yeah. Let me figure out how to use Spotify real quick. Oops. Under pressure. Dun, 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 dun. Wait, no, not that. Yeah. Ah. Oh wow. 2004. What?
Buzzing up with the musical attack. Rip it up with that boom sound we no lack. Got the rhythms of the play killer tracks. Annihilate and destroy them, we do that. Letting them know that we can be rock and control the game.
I didn't even have to use the One Ring to rule them all. It's okay, silly. Thank you. I hope you're doing good today. This does sound like an early 2000s song. I'm surprised I don't really remember it. What is this guy? A zombie cat? What the hell? What is that? Is it a cat man? Shit. Start your engines. Sacrifice another creature. Surveil one. Activate only once each turn. Max speed. I have no idea what these new mechanics are. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a tap 2/2 zombie creature token. Okay.
You gotta do what the card says.
Copy 25. Have 400 creatures with power 2 or less under. Say what? Say what? Say what? Brrr, brrr. Raw is crazy. Brrr.
Just drive them underground. Gotta take the music, kill the sound. You will turn it up and never down. Just drive them underground. Gotta take the music, kill the sound. You will turn it up and never down. Pressure. Pressure. Pressure.
Cool song. It reminded me of Alien Ant Farm too. So then I added that onto the queue. If you have any other songs, Too Cloudy, On Down. They can taste the pain. Hell no, hell no. I want you to be free. Don't worry about me. And just like the movies, we played out our last scene. Two can play this game. We both want power. In winter, we can taste what we're paying. In our short years, we come a long way. Treat it fair and grow it. In our short years, we come. So Z, I'm still here, doing good. What about you? I'm no good. It's my Friday today, so I am happy about that. And I'm on my new schedule, so I have longer days off now. Hopefully. For a bit. Love bites, so do I. I think I've heard of that song. Hailstorm. Actually, it's Sunday. Alright, I'll put that one on next. What is this guy doing? We come a long way. Dream I seem to brighten face. Just to throw it away. To be free. It is Sunday. My weekend is the end of the weekend. What the fudge? At the beginning of your upkeep, this permanent deals 2 damage to you unless you sacrifice it. You bitch. I got both rails out. First time ever. One of them's about to die, though. Both of them about to die, actually. At least he's killing the one that I want him to kill. What a shitload of fuck. At least I can draw a card. Or deal damage. I'm gonna draw a card. Because I'm about to fucking kill everything. That's silly for real. I'm pretty silly. This is a good song. Everyone dies. Oh, I should have used my goddamn otter card. Dude, this mother effer is like fucking me up. Are you gonna be able to wait, create a blood token? Knock it off with this. Oh my lord, I have to deal with this the whole goddamn game. Ay ay ay. Well, this isn't good. Ah, fuck me. I should have used a different spell. Ah, yeah. Why did I do it like this? I'm dumb. I already know which card I'm gonna take. Shit. As far as I know. Sacrifice? What is this? Sacrifice another creature, create blood tokens, and forget wage. Blah, 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 blah. I don't know. What's this song? It's Skindred. It's a different song of theirs, I think. It just started playing. I think it's because my algorithm had me listen to some of their music. Oh my lord. Yo, they rage quit. These guys sound pretty hard. Yeah, so the name? Rat Race. I'm sorry. Rat Race. My dumb OBS isn't updating the thing. Nice. Have you eaten today? I did. I had a boiga. It's only updating when you open the tab. Yeah, it's as soon as I put the tab up, it. Now this is a spine shank. I'm just a plain demon. I love the name of this card, Thing of the Ice. And then it transforms into Awoken Horror. What the F? Birds of Paradise? Tap for any mana? Yep. You can get that out of here. Give me that, and so I can play draws some cards. No. Let me get treasure. I don't know Spine Shock, but they sound pretty cool. Whenever another creature you control enters, do some bullshit. I'm gonna fuck with them if they decide to cast that again. I should probably wait till they cast that. Why would you use blue when I need that? Or should I just wait? Oh. I like this song. You better believe I'm gonna counter that. Whenever an opponent draws a card that... What the F? Your token. I don't give a F. I don't give a A. I don't give a explicitive word. What am I doing? No. Damn it. I gotta wait. Who is this? CKY? Haven't heard them in like, can't kill yourself? Cast a spell I want to counter. You know I'm gonna counter it. Oh, fuck. Dang it. Oh shit. Let's go, let's go, let's go. I'm ready to go. Let's go, let's go. Are you ready to go? I'm ready to go. Let's go, let's go. I'm ready to go. You know I'm gonna counter it. You know I'm gonna counter your damn card. What the fuck is that? Whatever another creature you control enters, blah 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 blah. Why'd that cost no mana? Oh, they did that shit where they... Fuck me. Not enough to feed the hungry.
Together we can shift the current.
This could be my chance to break out. Couldn't take this town much longer. That's annoying. Did I already use my... No. Oh my god. You know what card it is. Exile target enchantment. What's that H? Oh my god. Oh, whenever I draw a fucking card. It's probably gonna be game. They're casting so much mana. Or they're casting so much spells. And I gotta get going anyway, it's getting late. And this rock is way too hard for me. They're probably gonna start casting shit that's gonna be giving them crazy stuff. Look at that giant scary moth. What is this? I am confident I'm a homosexual.
Another genius idea by
Oh, as long as they don't get 1/1s, I might be able to do this. That might fuck with me though. What is this? Maybe not. At the beginning of your sacrifice gets spawned. Unless you sacrifice the land. Play game. They're gonna kill my otter. Oh, now I'm fucked. Seawater knocked that off. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I need cards anyways.
New world requires new strength. I need to workshop a new series.
Hey, it's these guys again. It's gotta be game now. Unless I get my Poseidon, which I won't. And I'm gonna get going. Too cloudy, thank you. Thank you for hanging out with me. You're so awesome. But I have to get going. You have a good rest of your Sunday. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll play something different. There's my Poseidon. I would have been able to do something. Anyway, you're awesome. Go on, dear. Have a good day. You have an awesome night, day, everything. You're the best. Awesome. Love you, love you, love you. Bye, bye, bye.